Hi,
Well,
everyone.
good evening, everybody. Look at that. The trio, the partnership is all here tonight. They drugged me out of bed. I can't believe the two of you would do this, even though I was the one that literally set the live up. But I'm thankful to have you both here. Kiki and Robert, it's great to see both of you.
Hello, how you guys doing tonight?
I'm doing great.
Well.
I see we got Natural Healing in the chat. We got Joey Agrila, Twizzle Stick, Deb Tabe.
Deb Tabe just said my opening music made her jump. And you know what's funny is it gets going with the original opening, and then that dragon comes out, and I forget the dragon part is there. And the next thing you know, I'm jumping and doing all kinds of stuff because all of a sudden it just comes out of nowhere. But I definitely understand, Deb, and I just let you know I did get your email, and I'll be responding to that as well. So Deb Tabe has been doing some amazing work behind the scenes, Robert and Kiki, that she's going to bring me in and allow me to be a part of, and it's pretty exciting, and I look forward to working with her on that. And I'll kind of give you guys some clues as we get going a little bit, but it looks like we're getting a nice little crowd started in here. We are, for everybody that's actually in the crowd tonight, we are streaming on all three channels. So please do me a favor and show some love and some support to both Robert and Kiki's channel. It's extremely important. This is not all about me. This team works together. We work hard together. And I would really appreciate if you could show both of these two some love as well.
Thank you. And likewise to my audience, please make sure to like and sub both to Robert and AR. If you've never visited their channels, their content complements my content so well. And I just, please give them a like and a sub. And make sure you tell them that we sent you there.
Yeah, and the same for the people who's watching on my channel. Please go to AR's channel and Kiki's channel and hit that like and subscribe, and please leave a nice comment on their channels.
So I definitely I would like to kind of announce that the three of us have come to a big agreement that we want to work together, even though we are all content creators that stand on our own 2 feet. We represent ourselves, our brands. We also, we have different views on different things, and some of us are more social capable than others. As you probably know, Robert and Kiki are very capable on the social media platforms, where I'm just not quite as capable. But I do want to let everybody know we're going to be doing this between 3, 4, maybe even 5 times a week, where we will be joining you, not only talking Idaho4, even though we're going to be focused on that through the trial time, but we're also going to focus on other things and other discussions. And we hope each and every single one of you, as a part of the community, would join us and be a part of that. Lend your open ideas to us that we can look into and we can deep dive and bring into the community as a discussion as well. But I'm excited to announce that, I look forward to working with both Kiki and Robert and just bringing a good, respectful, natural conversation out there to everybody.
Yeah, likewise. Yeah, likewise, brother. I'm looking forward to working with you and Kiki as well. And we always seem to have very good conversations when we're all three up on panel at the same time.
Same here. I love the chemistry that I have with the two of you, and your knowledge about these cases is definitely unique and unmatched. So this is a good team, and I can't wait to see what we bring to the table moving forward, because this case is just heating up, and we've got 4 months until trial, and it's going to be good from your perspectives.
And hopefully out of this team, I think everybody most likely knows we're spread out across the country. We're not all located in one place. But one thing that I think that I could bring as a part of this team is I will be on site in Idaho for the trial. I don't know if I'll be there the entirety of the 3 months, but I will be there for the majority of it, whether I come and go and show back up. And I will be broadcasting live from Boise, Idaho, and those will be streaming as well on both Kiki and Robert's channel, as well as mine. So you can look to your favorite creator or your favorite team of creators, and we will bring you on site right there, documentary and commentary, and then also our opinions and our thoughts based off of every day's recaps and what's happening in the trials. So that'll be exciting, guys. Robert and Kiki, that'll be very exciting to do.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely. Like, I remember when Twiz was at those hearings a long time ago, and you wouldn't believe it, but it's so invaluable to have somebody in that courtroom. No matter what you see on TV, it doesn't match being able to ask somebody, well, how did Bryan look today? What was his demeanor? You know, who was he glancing at? Little things. What did the prosecutor look like? What was the temperature behind the bench? You know, so it's going to be invaluable to have that to get it play by play, so to speak.
And I think a part of that will be a little bit unique that we can do too, as I'm broadcasting, I can give you the feel from a person that sat in that defendant's chair and had the feel of what a judge's type of remarks and their temperament are looking like when you're going through the day by day steps of these trials. And I can bring you those gut feelings that I get. And, it's pretty valuable when you can get a little bit of an idea of exactly how it feels in the courtroom. And I hope that I can actually make each and everybody that watches us feel in their gut exactly the tension, the excitement, everything that's happening as it's happening. I hope I can help you feel all of that, because that will help you kind of temper out how the trial's going and things of that nature. So, Robert, I do see on my side already, and Kiki, we do have a question from Jacob Monster already into this, and he makes a statement. I know DM said all the doors were open, but why would Hunter Johnson tell police he had to pry the open door for Ethan and Xana? It doesn't make sense to him. And I think you guys have spoken about this topic quite a bit as well. I mean, how do you guys feel about what you knew back when that came out compared to what you know now about the doors being open or closed?
Well, recently somebody brought up something that I thought was interesting, and forgive me, whoever said it to me, it escapes me, but we were having a conversation about this, and they wonder, could she have meant simply that the doors were just unlocked? Or does she mean that the doors were fully open? Because technically the term could mean either. So if the doors were fully open, then there's a whole lot of questions, exactly why didn't Murphy get into any of those crime scenes? But if it means that the doors were just simply unlocked, then it could possibly mean that if Hunter J was trying to open the door, it was being blocked by something versus being locked, having to pry open. And I don't know. What do you think, Robert?
Well, I mean, Hunter Johnson, he seems to be a very sturdy person, like muscular. I mean, if the doors were unlocked and he was trying to get into Xana's room, and I don't think it would be too difficult for him just to push really hard to get the door open. I mean, just like he stated that he had to pry the door open, where DM stated the doors were open. Like you were stating, Kiki, it could have meant that they were unlocked. Maybe they were open just a crack or something like that.
Right. Yeah.
I can tell you from personal experience, and I'm not the biggest of individuals. Probably when I was a little bit more on my bad behavior side, I did weigh quite a bit more, and I was quite a bit stronger than I am today. It's not hard to take those doors off the hinges and get those things down if you're willing to make the noise and not be afraid of what's happening behind you. I think in a situation like this, it's going to be very interesting when we get to trial and they begin to discuss what they actually mean by doors being open. Are they referring to the locks or just not, secured and locked? Or are they going to really present to us that doors were completely open and, people were able to get in and out of them? So very good question. And that's something that I think that we're going to have to really look forward to as we as we move through this trial on how they explain that. Do you guys agree?
Yeah, I agree. I'd like to say a quick hello to the people on my side. Love Tina, always good to have you here. Mark and Betty, Leslie and Billy, John Smith, Echoes of Clarity. Always good to see you in the chat, especially you, Twiz.
You got some hellos you would like to throw out there, Kiki, as well?
I actually would love to throw out a few hellos. Hello, Kane B. The Purge, who I love. Please go visit his channel, and he's got great live streams too. And Trisha from Echoes of Clarity. She had an amazing live stream today. I stayed for the whole thing. It was on Idaho4 updates. We've got Chris Ward and Mark G. And I've got Odds and OCD Shaggy. And Twizzlestick is making the rounds as well. Twiz, thanks for making an appearance in my chat. Everyone always loves saying hi to Twiz. Another creator who I hope you go visit his channel and subscribe, because his live streams are awesome too. So thank you, AR. I appreciate it.
Yeah, most definitely. I truly hope when I get up into Idaho to be able to attend the trial and spend some time up there. I'm hoping that people in and around the area, because there's a few that I know that follow the channel that are going to be up there, and they're going to be in and around, you know, the area. And I hope that we can all get together. Twiz, I'll even swing up there, pick you up wherever you are, whether it's Washington, Idaho, wherever you might be. And if you want to come hang out with the wife and I and go to this trial, and you could even put your perspective in there with me, I would love to have you. But anybody that's up in that area, I hope I get to say hello. But for everybody that's in the chat, just kind of know I'm slower than both Kiki and Robert. They handled the chats very well. I'm still learning how to do this, and I did take some actual medication today that literally flattened me for hours, and I'm trying to recover from that as we go. So bear with me. Have patience with me, because I may divert to Kiki and Robert to speak quite a bit as I go snooze in the background, but we're going to do everything that we can. And for those that are asking questions, I am marking them so that we can get to those later from my side. And then also anybody and everybody that decides that they would like to show their love with some gifted memberships, some super chats, of anything of that nature, to both of these great content creators. It's truly exciting to see that happen. Very appreciative, and I couldn't say thank you enough on my side. So.
Yeah, there is somebody in your chat asking, brother, what is my channel? Maybe Trisha can drop the link to my channel in the chat.
Yeah, if anybody can drop links to both Kiki and also Robert's channel. Echoes, if you can drop the link to your channel. I would like to see the links of all these amazing creators and people out there that do have channels. Let's show them some love and support. Kane B, Twizzlestick, everybody. I'm more than happy. That's one thing that I think the three of us that sit here, we will highlight anybody and everybody that puts in the effort and the love for the community. We support them 110%. Whether we agree with everything they say, that's a different story, but we definitely support the hard work and the love, because we know how difficult this is. So
we love this community. Thank you. And Mikey, thank you for the blessing, by the way.
I do want to transition, Kiki and Robert. Everybody knows, because the many channels have been going over them, and I've got a big fan club going on of dogs behind me right outside my back door that are just barking, and they're not mine. I don't leave mine out there like that. But I want to transition a little bit. As everybody knows, the motions for lemonade, however you want to say it, you can even call it lemonade if you want to. But they are beginning to roll in as the time frames have happened. So the prosecution obviously had a few hit the docket today. I did a video on those yesterday. I don't know how many were able to venture over and see that, but I've spoken upon many of these things in the past. And one of the first, because it's the easiest to jump into, and I will bring this docket up on the screen if it allows me to do this. I'm going to share it for everybody. We're going to jump a little bit into the Alibi and what the prosecution wants to do to keep Bryan Kohberger from being able to utilize an alibi defense at trial. So bear with me, guys. I'm gonna click here real quick and see if I can get this document. So if you guys want to talk for a minute, I'm gonna grab this document. But how do you guys feel, Robert and Kiki, in regards to Bryan Kohberger sharing an alibi? Do you think he will, attempt to do it, or do you think he's just going to accept the fact that he doesn't need to do that?
Well, I know at the beginning he came out with the whole Hawaii Park alibi when they were still in Latah. I'm not sure if he's going to still use that alibi or if they're just going to go ahead and not use the alibi since it's a completely new court. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Kiki?
I don't know. I've heard a little rumblings of this, and I just want to throw it out there. Of all the people, and AR, you would know, both of you would probably know this better than me. I can actually, if they're going to force in order for him to explain his alibi, for him to be on the stand, could you see Bryan Kohberger taking the stand? Because I could kind of see that happening. Maybe it's just because I've been following the case for so long, but he just seems like the kind of person who has the ability to speak in front of a crowd. I mean, I know a lot of times attorneys advise against it, but if you can't explain where you were, and the only way to do that is to take the stand, could he be a good candidate for advocating for himself on the stand? I don't know. I'd love to know what the chat thinks.
Robert, I'll let you give your opinion before I dive in, because I seem to be the one that chats a little more than everybody else. So I'll let you kind of dive in, Robert, and get your opinion out there.
Okay. Personally, I mean, if he takes the stand, I mean, would that hurt him or would that help him? It might help him with the defense, but we know how the prosecution likes to play dirty. Well, when it comes to cross-examination, and he may just decide not to take the stand. His defense team could say, well, you have a choice, either you're taking the stand or not taking the stand, but I would advise you not to take the stand. I mean, he can go against his defense team and take the stand, but I think in the end with the prosecution, that would hurt him instead of help him.
So I do have the document up, and I want to go over this briefly before I give my opinion based upon this, because it's very direct within this document exactly what the prosecution wants. And I'm not going to read the whole document because obviously it's been gone over tooth and nail with a fine tooth comb, but I do want to just bring up a few points, and then I can give you a little bit of an experience-based answer that can maybe help some people understand better not only what the prosecution side is, but also what Bryan Kohberger and his defense team would be thinking. So it comes now before the state of Idaho, by and through the Latah County prosecuting attorney. They moved the court in limine for an order prohibiting the defendant from presenting any evidence, whether by direct or cross-examination, in support of any claimed alibi other than the defendant himself. So let's just briefly touch on that. I mean, obviously here, I'll leave it up on the screen. It actually explains kind of the history of what happened in regards to this alibi argument within the courts. And I can understand why the prosecution is upset, because they feel like the deadlines have come and gone and they weren't answered appropriately by the defense, because Ann Taylor just kind of gave a couple of runarounds. Within the answer, not giving up all of it, because she stated clearly she wanted to get more of the actual evidence from the prosecution before they laid out what their full disclosure of an alibi would be. And I made this, I thought, pretty clear of my opinion from very early on. The defense was never going to give up an alibi. They were never going to share an alibi with anybody, but what they were going to do was rope it along to get as much information from the prosecution that would give them the knowledge of how they were going to take this at the trial and attack it based upon the prosecution's own witnesses taking the stand, meaning the experts. They wanted the experts to get up and speak about the cell phone pings, the car visuals, everything of that nature. And then the defense team, led by Ann Taylor and Massoff, was going to attack that and discredit it. So now, I mean, as you guys have seen, we've gone through literally months upon months in 2024 in regards to the alibi. And then we get down to where we're at today, and the prosecution has literally thrown it out there for Judge Hippler to say, we do not want anything to be able to be talked about in regards to an alibi for Bryan Kohberger unless it's from him himself taking the stand. And what really kind of upset me about this, Kiki and Robert, and I'm going to throw this at you, and then I just kind of want to hear your reaction to this. But literally what the prosecution has done is they've stated that they want the court to issue an order that if Bryan Kohberger does not get up on that stand to defend himself, they don't even want the defense to be able to cross-examine the state's experts to discredit anything to show that Bryan Kohberger was not at the crime scene or the one that committed the crime. They do not even, so let's just use an example. Payne, the lead detective Payne, gets up on the stand. He goes through the whole examination through the prosecution, answering their questions in regards to how he pinpointed the car and Bryan Kohberger being the one in and around the crime scene. Now they rest, and the defense it's their turn to get up and pick apart that story. It's their turn to get up there and prove Brent Payne is wrong. And they want the judge, the prosecution, to put in an order that they cannot bring up any type of information that does not place Bryan Kohberger at the crime scene, in or near it, his car. So they could not question the car identification. They can't question the time frame. They can't question anything that's being presented by the prosecution in their case. They cannot argue it. How do you guys feel about that?
It sounds like to me they're stacking the deck, or at least trying to stack the deck to make sure that this guy gets tried and convicted and sentenced to death. That's the way I see it. You know, I see that them stacking the deck to the point that, you know, like you just said, they wouldn't be able to cross-examine or bring up anything that would take Bryan away from the scene. It feels like a big trap. Maybe there's I know there's corruption going on there in Moscow and Idaho. I know that, but it sounds like they're laying a trap for the defense just to see what the defense does. And if that's the case, then it would be like rigging an election. I wouldn't say rigging an election, but it'd be like rigging a verdict, basically.
So I want to answer real quick, and then Kiki, I'm going to jump to you. Lovetina says, can't he say that he was he was at the lake or he was out for a jog? That he can do if this order gets put into place. Bryan Kohberger has to walk up to that stand. He has to sit in that chair, and he has to present his own story to where, why, how, anything about his alibi. But remember, the defense cannot call anybody to back up what he says. He has no witnesses to support, and that's all based upon this motion. If this is approved, nobody could support his alibi but him. So now what that comes down to is whether the jury finds him creditable, what he has to say is creditable, because when the actual prosecution steps to the plate, they get to present experts, they get to present theories, they get to present ideas of where he was, why he was there. And guess what? The defense can't combat it outside of Bryan Kohberger's own voice. So, Kiki, I want to throw that to you before I kind of speak upon how I feel Bryan Kohberger taking the stand. So I'm going to throw it over to you and let you.
All right. Well, no, I have like 3 different points I'm going to make. Then the first one is when it comes to the alibi law in the state of Idaho, if I'm not mistaken, what they're asking seems to be outside of the spirit of the law. And the spirit of the law is, so as far as I can tell, is to prevent a surprise at court. Like to prevent the aha moment. Oh, actually, I have this great alibi I never told you guys about. But in this case, we're going through all the hearings and we know all the evidence. There are no surprises. So if he's not taking the stand to prove an exact alibi, essentially what it seems they're doing, which is my second point, which is taking his entire defense away, taking his ability to defend anything at the crime scene. What I found most interesting was, and I'll give credit to Twiz for this, he had sent me the motion in lemony for the AT&T timing advanced records, just a snapshot that was on the court summary page. And it just got me to thinking, like, the reason why they were initially trying to suppress that was they were arguing probable cause, right? So if they're trying to suppress it now, it makes me think, what exactly don't they have? Because we assume they had metadata, GPS, and timing that put Bryan Kohberger at the scene. So why would they have to suppress the AT&T advanced timing records that have to do with the cast report and where Bryan Kohberger was? Because that's Cy Ray's expertise. And so if they have to suppress Cy Ray and his expertise as to where Bryan Kohberger was, doesn't that kind of mean they don't have GPS or metadata on Bryan Kohberger? I'm just reasonable deduction here. And then also back to that, I don't know how describing the crime scene is necessarily giving an alibi. It just seems like telling the truth, right? And that's not an anti-police or anything like that. I'm just saying, like, to suppress the crime scene evidence, the actual evidence appears, to be suppressing the truth, not necessarily stopping an alibi. It's just talking about the crime scene. So I don't know if I made any cohesive points there that anyone wants to build off of.
Well, I mean, everything that you're speaking of is very relative and very pinpointed to some exact details that are very necessary. But at the end of the day, just to put it very simply, this is a battle. And we're just going to kind of speak about the alibi for a second before we move into other directions, because the alibi, the defense doesn't see this alibi situation as anything important. I've said this in the past. I'm going to say it again. This alibi defense for Bryan Kohberger means absolutely nothing. Nothing. They don't care that Bryan Kohberger would have to step up to the plate and speak on the defense table to be able to get information about where he was, when he was there, why he was there. They don't care about any of that. This was a very strategic maneuver by the defense to say, hey, look, we know the game you're playing. We know where you're lacking on your evidence, and we have an expert over here that we're going to bring on very early in this process and allow him to speak at these various hearings prior to even getting to trial to make you guys squirm a little bit, because now it's out there. We know, and that's why they attacked all of those things, obviously, through the process of getting into the suppression motions and things of that nature. They never had any inkling that they were going to put up a fight for Bryan Kohberger's alibi. They were never going to say he was over here at such and such a time. They were going to leave this very open. And at the end of the day, I'm going to leave it, just kind of in a defendant stance that's been in these high pressure situations of whether to take the stand or not take the stand. Bryan Kohberger will walk nowhere near a stand to testify. Even if he wanted to, his defense team would put him on medications to put him asleep for that day of the trial so that they didn't have to take the risk of it. Bryan Kohberger will be nowhere near testifying because it leaves the door far too open for the prosecution to get him to slip up and say something. And at the end of this day, even if he is not guilty, they're going to be pushing the issue. Does he know who is guilty? Does he know anybody that could possibly be involved in this? And they could utilize his testimony just to try to get more information from him based upon the crime that they could utilize as almost an investigative way of investigating the crime without having to do any of the work themselves. And guys, I have been marking your questions, so please don't think that we're not going to get to these, because we definitely will. We definitely appreciate the interaction with all of you. I'll jump on this one just real quick because it did pop up on the screen. I'm so handy with doing this. So if there are more than one perp, does Ann Taylor know who, and will she and the defense team use that to say it was them and give evidence back to it not being Bryan Kohberger? And that's a very good question that I think we'll hold for just a second, because we're going to get into an alternative perpetrator of the evidence motion that was also filed. I just want to summarize this one and get your guys' thoughts at the end of the day on the alibi. Do you feel like an alibi is necessary in this case, Robert and Kiki? And if so, do you think the defense really should take that step and put Bryan Kohberger on the stand if necessary to prove it?
Well, I'm going to go back to my original statement that if he gets put on the stand, it's going to hurt him instead of help him. It'll help him with the defense, but hurt him with the prosecutor. And there's a comment by Rochelle here in the chat. Does that mean that would get rid of Cyree? How can he give his opinion of where Bryan was without saying where he was, which would be evidence of an alibi? Is this to get rid of Cyree? Now I was thinking about this when I saw the comment, and I revert back to what you'd been saying all along, brother, that Cyree may not testify in the trial. I mean, there's a slim chance he might, but at the same time, he may not. Yeah, especially if this prosecution motion goes through. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, brother?
Cyree will not be testifying at this trial. Cyree was brought in for a very distinctive purpose within the defense, and he is still working with the defense. I don't want anybody to take my words when I say Cyree will not be testifying for the defense and say, well, Cyree is no longer on the defense and helping Bryan Kohberger's cause in his defense. I didn't say that. Cyree is not going to get up onto the stand and testify because the exact reasoning why he was a part of this in the beginning is already playing out before all of our eyes. We see the issues within the cell phone and the different cell datas. He brought the light to all of that in the past hearings that he was involved in, and now he stands with the defense to analyze any of the evidence turned over in discovery, and he's going to be working with them. They are not going to present Cyree up on the stand in this case to testify. That's my opinion, but I'm pretty solid in that opinion that I would stand behind it pretty heart and soul, because he's already done his purpose. It's out there. Whatever he could testify to is now known. So we'll see. We'll see. Kiki, how do you feel?
Well, I'm really interested now. I want to know more about that. But the thing that I don't know is where it's on record, and maybe it's in one of the declarations and I didn't see it, is his exact explanation as to where Bryan Kohberger was. Because I saw I believe it was the declaration that Jay Logston put out in December, they mention how in these records, in this timing data, the state states Bryan Kohberger is going one direction, but Cyree shows that he's going another direction. So I wonder where that entire mapping that Cyree did, where it's documented, and are they just going to show that testimony? Or you know what I mean? I guess this is the argument now. If it's put into lemony, then the jury will never hear that Bryan Kohberger was going the opposite direction. But if it's not, and if it's allowed, if the timing, the timing data is allowed to be shown, the AT&T timing advanced records are allowed to be shown, then do we have like a document that shows if Syra is not going to testify, where's that testimony? How do they show that testimony that Bryan was going the opposite direction? Because obviously my hair is like all messed up. Obviously that's important. And obviously that's going to be part of their description of what Bryan was doing at the time of, you know, how is that going to get presented if Sy doesn't come take the stand?
Well, and I want you to understand too, Syra is not the only expert the defense has. Like a lot of people are really excited about Syra. I think he's a good individual. I've liked watching the things that he discusses, and I personally haven't jumped over and really watched much of him work on the YouTube streets, but I mean, he's a highly intelligent person. And what people probably kind of would laugh about too is a lot of my criminal background was from the Arizona area where he was a detective in law enforcement. And I wouldn't doubt if he actually worked on some of my cases to help get me hemmed up and locked up. So he has an amazing track record, but that doesn't mean just because you have all that solid background that his work isn't actual pre-trial work, to the fact that he would not be utilized at the trial. I think his work has been utilized. I think that what he was able to portray to everybody, including us that are all here that have visually seen what he brought to the forefront, I think it's amazing. I think it's important. But it's out there now. And when we get into the trial, I think most of us are already seeing through the state's own documentation being released of things discussed in these hearings. They don't have a strong sense of how to portray the cell phone pings, and the things of that nature, because they themselves may not even bring it up, more than to try to prove a route or some of that nature. They may not have enough evidence on that to really nail Bryan Kohberger down with it. So at that point in time, if you don't have enough power to bring it, does the defense have to bring power to defend it? Because it just might be kind of overlooked and not talked about. I mean, transitioning from that, I think one thing that's just as important as the alibi situation, and the prosecution is attacking it very quickly, is the actual God, it just skipped right out of my mind. But we're talking about the limine for the alternative perpetrator evidence that now the prosecution wants to keep out the defense's ability to be able to present evidence of an additional perpetrator or an additional suspect or two within this case that could have potentially committed the crime, given Bryan Kohberger the reasonable doubt that he seeks in front of a jury. So, in your guys' opinion, from what we've seen so far in the discussions that we've had, do you feel as though what's been presented to us is legitimate evidence, like the blood on the handrail and the things of that nature, in your minds? If you were sitting in a jury box and you heard those things, does that give you some doubt in the prosecution's real capability of the investigation? Does it also give you a sense of more perpetrators or even different perpetrators?
Well, I was reading that 175-page redacted document today, and Taylor asked Brett Payne about the blood on the railing and the type male B, DNA, and Brett Payne said that they knew about that way before they knew about the DNA on the knife sheath, and they didn't want to and this came out of Brett Payne's mouth. They didn't want to upload it because it would get rid of the knife sheath DNA, and the way he stated it, the way Ann Taylor stated it. So you didn't know about Bryan until the 19th of December, correct? And he said, yes, ma'am. And then she said, so why didn't you get this DNA tested? And that was his exact comment. It would get rid of the knife sheath DNA if we uploaded it into CODIS, and we mutually decided we can wait on it since we already have the name of a person of interest, and and then we could go back at a later date and then look at that DNA.
Good points. How do you feel, Kiki?
I'm sorry, I had it on
She's
mute.
muted.
Sorry about that. So the one thing, so obviously, just like all of you, it brings some reasonable doubt. And with us not knowing the circumstances around these unknown DNA, but what I thought was interesting, you were bringing up, somebody was talking about the handrail, the handprint, the unknown DNA there. Well, Miss Potts brought up an interesting thing in her live stream, and I don't know enough about it, so maybe it's more of a question to you two. I heard that the print on the handrail was 2 unknown DNA. So there's 2 unknown DNA in that print. That changes things, everything for me, if that's true, right? I mean, it does not change everything, chat. I mean, it's one thing to think if somehow somebody got an accident happened, blood, but 2 blood on it changes things. And if I still have the floor,
I think you're kind of referring to a mix.
Yeah, a mixed. The other thing that I was having, if Mikey's still here, he kind of was having a conversation with me about this yesterday. But we were talking about, like, where is the raw data for the unknown DNAs? Was this sent over to Author Lab? Was this in the possession of the FBI? Was this something just at ISP? Do we know the custody of these unknown male DNAs? And literally, do we know what extent the workup was done on them? So, who had the raw DNA? What was the chain of custody for it? These are the unknown DNAs, and what stages did it get to?
So unfortunately, Robert, I don't mean.
Under what circumstance, like, if he says he's going to go back and he's going to test them if necessary, you tell me, chat, under what circumstance would it be necessary? This is the most high profile murder case in the entire world. It's a public safety issue. It's horrific. Like, what circumstance would you not test them? I don't, if he's saying if we need to in the future, well, what circumstance would you not test these samples? I just can't think of a circumstance unless there's something we don't know. Like there was a good explanation as to why those samples were there that somebody can like concrete say why. And I'm sorry if I hijacked the live stream talking, but
go ahead, brother.
Robert, I just wanted to jump. Go ahead.
I was gonna say you go ahead.
We're doing the go ahead back and forth. I think maybe we have a little bit of a delay to where I don't mean to cut you off, Robert, because I definitely want to hear your thoughts and your opinions on it. And I because I've been through the system, I know the games that go back and forth between the prosecution and the defense when it comes to these types of things, because the defense, they want to get as much thought out there in regards to anything that could create reasonable doubt, where the prosecution clearly states it in the nature. If the defendant proffers evidence which merely tends to mislead the jury that another person committed this crime, or the evidence is not relevant because it does not tend to make the defendant's involvement more probable or less probable, then it is within the trial's court discretion to find the evidence inadmissible. Mere inferences that another person could have committed this crime will most likely not be relevant, and if relevant, will still be subject to the limitation provision. So this is where the fight always takes place in a situation like this, and it's happened in some of my cases. The prosecution is leading the court in the very honest way that they feel like they can do it, saying, we've got our guy. Anything that could be presented about evidence found at the crime scene outside of what we've presented could be deemed misleading to a jury. So they're saying, we found a knife sheath next to the bodies of the victim that has DNA on it that directly connects to these other links that we feel lead us to believe this individual, Bryan Kohberger, is our main and only suspect. And the defense looks at that and says, well, why is there other evidence found in the home, in different parts of the home and outside of the home, that could lead credence to there's possibly more than just Bryan Kohberger, or it may not have been Bryan Kohberger at all. So now what the prosecution wants to do is they want to get in there before this gets going. They want to get into this judge's mind and say, look, Your Honor, this is going to become a whirlwind of just bogus tales being told at trial. And we want to avoid this. We want the jury to be directed and stay on course of why Bryan Kohberger is the defendant sitting in that chair over there. And we don't want the defense to have an open realm to state that they feel as though this person could have done it, that person could have done it, this is why this person could have done it, when nothing evidence-wise has been disclosed that leads to any of those individuals. So they're trying to nullify the evidence factor of an alternative suspect, not so much that the defense can't bring up an alternative suspect scenario, but they're trying to say, hey, look, we don't want the blood on the handrail spoken upon in this trial because it has no reasoning of why we're even here, and it does not tie back to Bryan Kohberger or this case. And the judge, in response to that, should say, well, you know, what evidence do you have that it has no part of this case? Like, how can you explain away blood on a handrail in a multiple victim crime scene with stabbing and blood flow everywhere? How can you explain that away? And Bill Thompson's going to look right at him and say, we're going to present that at trial. We just want to protect ourselves to know no fantasies could be brought up. And look, a lot of that stems, and this is a new day and age. We didn't have a lot of this stuff, Robert, when you and I were getting caught up in our endeavors and getting sentenced to the criminal system. They didn't have all this social media backing and the stirring of theories and rumors. You had mainstream media that told the story of what the prosecution and the courts wanted them to tell. And then you watched everything play out in the courts. And now you have far more than that. The three of us sitting here on panel have three different views of what possibly happened in this home and what's important. The other 1 million content creators and more that are coming out on a daily basis have their views and their thoughts of what could have potentially happened. So now we got a whirlwind. And the prosecution's trying to get this judge to realize that, like, hey, we even had to go through a whole change of venue scenario because of this problem. So we wanted to gate it now. And the biggest question outside of that, and I'd love to think that I know the answer, but I potentially just really don't. That's why I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. Does this handcuff the defense in a way that they no longer have a defense angle for Bryan Kohberger? If you take away an alternative suspect conversation evidence-wise, I'm not saying that you can't step up to the plate and say there's potentially other people that committed this crime and that this is our thought process on that, but you can't present evidence to that. You can't speak about the blood. Does that handcuff the defense now that are literally out of options for defense?
Personally, it doesn't handcuff them all the way, but it could personally handcuff them a little bit, and not being able to speak about the blood evidence, especially about the unknown male DNA B, because was Brett Payne said that they wanted to test it, but if they tested it, it would take away the DNA from the knife sheath. So, I believe they know something more going on, but they're just not telling us. And sometimes I do believe that Bryan's a patsy. In all honesty, I believe that sometimes Bryan's a patsy. And when I saw that statement by Payne that they had somebody early on before Bryan, then that just kind of confirmed it just a little bit.
I agree. Kiki, how do you feel?
Well, the first thing is I'll just bring Judge Hippler's words back to him, which he said, how is DNA on a knife sheath not DNA on a knife sheath twice every day, or every day and twice on Sunday? Well, how is DNA on a crime scene not DNA at a crime scene twice every day and not on Sunday? And the way that I feel about not being able to bring up the alternative suspects is, the thing is it kind of depends on what the evidence of the alternative suspects. What that feels like to me is, okay, well, it depends on the evidence. Is it as circumstantial as Bryan Kohberger's evidence? Because, I mean, that's kind of comparing apples and apples, in my opinion. And then the last point I wanted to bring up is, when it comes to this case, I think it brings into question, especially hearing all these issues going on with the evidence, it brings into issue, and that noise, if anyone's wondering, is my dog is snoring right now. That like rolling thunder noise. Sorry about that. What brings into the grand jury into question, because these things should have been talked about and brought up in pretrial hearings. Whether or not they're evidence should have been brought up in pretrial hearings. And it does 100% throw into question when and where you use that grand jury process, and what are the consequences of using that process. Is it a confusing trial like this? Is it a trial like this where people feel like some evidence might get overlooked? But back to my initial point is this, is if DNA is evidence every day and twice on Sunday, then why isn't the other unknown DNA evidence every day and twice on Sunday? It was in a crime scene. Unless there's something we don't know and it can be explained away.
But let me ask you this, because I mean, I think everybody, I mean, especially the three of us, we have a little bit of doubts how you got to Bryan Kohberger as a suspect, and you didn't utilize other DNA found at the crime scene to see who else potentially was at that crime scene that could be a part of the, the defendant pool of people. Why didn't we go arrest those people and then figure out their DNA scenario as well? So I agree with you guys on the fact, I think blood at a crime scene is extremely important, especially for someone like myself that's been through the scenarios, been investigated, had to go to trial, at DNA and fingerprints and sweat and blood and torn clothing. All of these things mattered in every case I was in, not only in the cases to where they were trying to prove me as the guilty individual, but also in the cases they were trying to figure out who I could have potentially been doing what I was doing with. So in this scenario, where I find it to be somewhat difficult is everybody is pinpointed onto Bryan Kohberger. They're all pinpointed onto him. Not anything else has led them in a different direction. And I think it was clearly stated by Ann Taylor in the very courtroom before this very judge when she said, no investigation was properly conducted by local authorities or anybody else. They got the IGG information back as a tip and they ran with it. And we, from afar, are internalizing that and seeing that night and day. We're seeing that as a legitimate argument, and especially now that we're learning these things. But this judge, I'm telling you, Judge Hippler, from everything that I'm watching of this man, because I watched him very hard during these hearings about the way that he was looking at things and analyzing the things being said. He already is utilizing that knife sheath and the little bit of DNA found on it that Bryan Kohberger was at the crime scene and one of the perpetrators of this crime. And then he just lends the idea that the other blood DNA could just possibly be people working with Bryan Kohberger. So when I'm looking at the thought process of alternative suspect DNA, Hippler is absolutely going to leave this blood out. He's going to find a reason to keep this off of the docket, off of the discussion points within this trial. He's going to follow the lead of this prosecution when they state that they want to be very careful in misleading a jury with a story It's sad because that DNA, the reason why I say this is going to happen is that DNA comes back to nobody. There's nobody tied to that DNA. And one of the arguments that you have to make during the trial, if you're going to utilize the reasonable doubt perspective of an alternative scenario or an alternative suspect, you better have some evidence that ties into that, meaning that blood DNA, that mixture should have came back to somebody. And the defense would have that in their hands because it would have been done evidentiary wise. They would have had all the lab reports. They would have had everything to back their thought process of this blood mixture comes back to X person. And now we're going to build a reasoning why they could potentially be a part of this crime scene or this crime. And at this point, they have none of that. And that's scary. That's scary because that falls in law enforcement's hands, the people that are deemed to be the protectors of your community, my community, Robert's community, and everybody within this chat were deemed to have the protection through good investigators and proper channels of law enforcement. And I think this is a perfect scenario of where that just crumbled. Because if there is alternative suspects, if there are other people that either committed this crime or are involved in this crime, we just let them off the hook. And that could potentially bring Bryan Kohberger down as a single individual in a crime that he would not be the single perp of, if that makes sense.
Yes, that makes sense. I want to get to this comment by Miss Potts. If ISP collected the sheath and bagged it as Payne testified to, then why is the swab from the sheath going from MPD to ISP?
Can I follow up with that real quick?
Yeah.
Okay, because I've been kind of dying to like elaborate on this a little. So Mikey, one of my researchers, has been doing research on it, and he brought up a comment at 1012 that says Othram was told, "Don't do it. Stop by Idaho State Lab, and the FBI took the sample. Raw though, and that's with a question mark. It was found, and it has me wondering why the report is missing on Othram's end." So in other words, why not only is it mysterious about why these DNAs weren't tested or the data wasn't used as, I mean, just for a public safety issue like AR and Robert were talking about. So a mass murderer isn't on the streets or accomplices, but just the peculiarness about how it was handled differently than the touch transfer DNA. Especially when I've heard people state, and I haven't read it with my own eyes, so I don't know exactly what they're referencing, but when you reference other DNA that could have been possibly found on the sheath as well, it's just peculiar, and I'd like to know more the reasoning why only DNA that was deemed important and to go through the incomplete process, from what we can tell with our research, was touch transfer DNA. And can I bring up one other point while we're on this, which Wakanyan Tonka was talking to me about before this live stream? We were talking about something from Miss Potts' live stream, and thank God I had actually screen recorded it. We were talking about the suppressed Google warrants. What's interesting about the suppressed Google, or the motion to suppress the Google warrants, okay? In those Google warrants, the one thing that they bring up are the CVS inquiries. So if they didn't have Bryan Kohberger's name until December 19th, then how did they do an inquiry on the 16th of December to CVS? And I'm not saying this because I'm just, I mean, these, if we're trying to build a picture of, we're trying to figure out what's going on, how is this huge piece so different? And in that in itself, how is that not slightly, I don't know how that in itself doesn't contradict the case that the prosecution is building. There's a word for it. It's RUT. I can't remember what it is, but repudiate or something like that. How doesn't it go against what we're being told right now? And is Ann Taylor just walking? Is this a way for Ann Taylor just kind of walk the prosecution into some sort of trap by continuing to say, well, we got this tip on the 19th, but here we are, you know, and there are other sketchy things, such as Christy Gonzalez talking about the timeline going back to the 13th of December and having Bryan Kohberger's name swirled around. And if you really want to get into the weeds, you can bring up the fact that Chief Fry was out with his U-Haul with the Pennsylvania on it. I mean, how ironic was that? Because when we saw that, we all thought back to 4chan, where 4chan brought up Poconos, Pennsylvania. And could that have been law enforcement on there trying to suss out the unaliver? And if they already thought it was Bryan, they named Pocono Pine in there, where he was going to be. So when we think about the case that's being presented to us and the paperwork and what Ann Taylor is telling us about the 19th, the fact is we have documentation now in the Google warrants suggesting the CVS search on the 16th. And we have Christy Gonzalez, the parent of one of the victims, saying that the name was told to her by ISP on the 13th. And then those other sketchy dates I brought up. And I'll toss it back to you guys and shut up.
Go ahead, Robert.
I mean, personally, that's just kind of weird. A couple of days after the murder, and you back a U-Haul truck up to the crime scene, to take all the all the belongings out of the deceased college students. And I mean, they only collected 117 pieces of evidence, and that was for all 4 of the students. I've never seen evidence that low in a quadruple homicide before, and there was just weird protocol, to back up a U-Haul and take out all the belongings of the students. I've never seen that happen ever in a crime scene investigation, where you load everything up in a U-Haul, and then you label it, for the deceased students, bedroom number 2, bedroom number 1, bedroom number 4. Who does that? And it goes back to, they were in over their heads when it comes to the homicide. And I released a video yesterday where I stated Brett Payne more than likely never was involved with a homicide of this magnitude. And 24 hours after the homicide, that they slapped lead investigator on in front of his name, when he more than likely has never investigated a murder of this magnitude before. And I bet you half of Moscow never thought that this would be a high-profile case where all eyes would be on Moscow.
Yeah, I mean, they got caught. I always use the term, and maybe it's appropriate, maybe it's not. They got caught with their pants down. They were expecting one thing when it came to this case, and then all of a sudden they backed themselves into a corner. And, I still reflect back to very early on when this case was being discussed, even before Bryan Kohberger was even in the picture. And I was in and out of the various different Facebook discussion groups and the things on social media. I know me in social media platforms, holy cow, but I was, and I even created my own, my own Facebook groups to discuss this case. And I got into interactions and discussions with the very, profile that they claim was going to come back to Bryan Kohberger. And I knew, and I never really pushed the issue with people, but I knew it was law enforcement. Like I've just been around the block. Like I know how they interact. I know the things that they say. I know the hooks that they throw out there trying to hook somebody. I get all that. And I knew it was a fishing line, and I just kind of laughed about it, and I stopped mingling with the individual, and then they got banned from the group and all this stuff. But, I get the ideas, that all of this stuff is just odd. I mean, I knew this case was completely just off script when they literally were extraditing him back and showing the flight pattern of the plane that he was on, with news cameras being able to be at the landing spots where he would utilize the restroom. Based upon the fact I've been extradited numerous times, and it's always done very privately, very in the dark, no information, nothing to the point that, you could get hemmed up or get someone trying to help that individual escape, yet we're going to showcase the entire platform. And it kind of leads credence to, we're watching the Luigi Mangione case out of New York, and they did the perp walk off of the stupid helicopter with the mayor of the town showcasing, here's our guy, he's so guilty, and we haven't even been to the arraignment yet, you know. So it gets, go ahead.
No, I was gonna say that's an interesting case. Were we gonna talk about Luigi Mangione tonight, or is that off the table?
No, I definitely wanted to venture into that. This was going to be, you know, discussion of other current cases as well. So I know Robert was looking into some stuff with Delphi, and you know, another affidavit came out, and then obviously Luigi Mangione was just in the court just days ago. Big fan club. Let me tell you, that young man's got a fan club. If I could get that fan club, I would be pretty excited. So, I mean, if you have some feelings you want to express on that, let's do that too.
Sure. Oh, I'd love to, if you don't mind. I mean, yeah, I saw the fan clubs too, and I was kind of looking at their signs and listening to what they had to say, because I wanted to know if it was somebody who had a crush on Luigi just because he was good looking, or if it was people who were opposed to the situation. And it looked like people were. It was more about the narrative that people were pushing back on. But I do actually have, I mean, I don't know if it's worth anything to you guys. I do have a little inside information on Luigi Mangione, not too much, but a little bit I could share. I'm not going to get into names or anything, but I do have a family member who is on a first name basis with a cousin of his. And I mean, I don't follow the case, but I was actually telling Unfiltered Lucky about this if he wanted to use it in one of his videos one time. But she was telling me about the case because she had asked when she heard the name, she's like, oh, is that so-and-so? And they asked him about it, and they said that when it happened, and you guys might all know this, like I said, I don't follow the case, but she was saying that when it happened, like, that cousin, just because he had the last name, like, he woke up the next day and there was just media plastered on his front lawn to get any information. And he said that the social media pushback on the families was awful. Like, they should have turned him in, or they should have known it was him. But I guess the insight I can give you is they didn't. Like, these weren't obvious pictures. And just like us, there was confusion about who the identity of this perpetrator was. I'm trying to think of anything else I could tell you. I know that also it was the sentiments of other people within the family. Where did this radicalization, where and when did it happen? This didn't come out of a bubble. He wasn't like this from the start. You know, where, or if he's involved, where was the interaction with somebody else that could have influenced him? So that's about all I have. But I wanted to weigh in on the two thoughts I had on that. I don't know if that's good information for anyone.
I mean, it's going to be a very intriguing case to follow, because not only is it state down there in New York, but now it's also a federal with the death penalty backing of that case, that we're already seeing the, the defense team, they are bucking back immediately, because it seems like not only are the feds trying to keep this out of people's eyes, but obviously the state of New York is as well. So everything that's happening, they're trying to keep the courtrooms closed. They're trying to keep it quiet. And let me tell you, this defense team is not going to roll with that. They're going to bring this out, and they're going to talk about it, and they're going to present it to people, because, you know, they want to see what people's reactions and how are they going to defend this in the courtroom. But this is another case. I mean, Luigi Mangione is just another odd scenario that fits right in with what's happening in the Idaho4 case, what's happening in the Richard Delphi case. I mean, the Richard Allen, not Richard Delphi. I mean, I guess they merge, but but I mean, we're seeing the secrecy in all of these cases, and why all of a sudden does our law enforcement and our judicial system feel like we need to do so much behind the scenes and in the dark, rather than just present it to people like all of us and allow us to weigh out our thoughts and opinions based on guilt or not guilt, on what we find to be evidence or not evidence. Right now, the judicial system knows They're being scrutinized. I think there's a lot that's happening that, I mean, this IgG testing stuff is going to be in the public view. And I mean, I hate to say it. I think if this IgG is utilized and they get a guilty conviction of Bryan Kohberger based upon the FBI utilizing services they should not be utilizing, and they still don't discipline that, but they go ahead and find this young man guilty and he could potentially lose his life, I think we're going to have an uproar. Like, people don't understand. There's a lot of people following this case, and it's going to turn into an uproar. And then you add on the Richard Allen scenario, the Karen Reed scenario, the Luigi Mangione scenario, and maybe they're not all innocent. We don't know as of yet. But I'll tell you what, it's going to stir an uprising with people that want transparent and honest, not only law enforcement investigative means, but also the court system handling these things step by step in a proper manner. And it's going to be interesting to watch. And, Robert, I don't know how you feel, but these big cases that are getting a lot of notoriety, they're getting scary to watch.
Oh yeah, especially with with the affidavit I sent to you. I sent it to you, and I also sent it to Lucky. And I was asked a very legitimate question when I posted it on my community page. This gentleman asked me, "Do we even know if the secretary or whoever it was actually gave the letters to the prosecutor?" Well, she stated to Richie Davis's uncle that she did, but the prosecution and the investigators ignored the letters, and he had been writing them the letters since even before Richard Allen was a suspect, and and the prosecution even threw away a confession by Ron Logan. Yeah, because Ron Logan had confessed to the police about the murders of Abby and Libby, and the prosecution and the investigators suppressed that confession and went after Richard Allen. And I honestly believe I mean, if you look at it, he was tried in the dark, he was convicted in the dark, he was sentenced in the dark. He was their patsy, and they didn't want anybody to see exactly what was going on in that courtroom. And I blame that on Judge Gall, for not allowing cameras into the courtroom, because she knew what she was doing, and she knew she was sentencing a innocent man, because the killer had already confessed, and it was suppressed by the investigators and the prosecution. And that affidavit is really telling. And he had one of Richard Allen's attorneys actually type it up verbatim of what he was telling the attorney. And he even states in the affidavit, he goes, "This is not my attorney. The attorney is typing it up verbatim as I'm telling him." So, if they do have another trial, I mean, I hope they have another retrial for Richard Allen. This gentleman said he would get up on the stand and testify, and so would Richie Davis.
And I just want to make a quick reference that the case that Robert's talking about, for those that maybe don't know, is the Richard Allen Delphi case out of Indiana, where an affidavit has been released, and they're discussing over people that potentially have written letters that, either give evidence or even ideas of what happened during the crime. And this also could stem back. I mean, this seems to have happened in a couple of crimes. Even in the Idaho4, we've seen that somebody could have possibly given up information over on the East Coast that was not utilized, in the investigation, or, moving forward with looking at suspects. And what's scary about that is literally, and I'm going to present this, which is, the Idaho4. So it runs in line. It's not the Delphi affidavit, because I don't have that right in front of me, but this runs in line of the same kind of thing happening in the Idaho4, where it states, during the course of the investigation, literally thousands of tips regarding possible perpetrators were received by law enforcement, with the exception of information regarding the defendant, which I'll put in the name, Bryan Kohberger. None of these tips were substantiated. The state submits that any attempt by the defendant to offer or argue an alternative perpetrator theory without evidence specifically connecting persons other than the defendant to the homicides would do nothing more than mislead and confuse the jury, and also would result in undue delay, a waste of time, would be a needless presentation of cumulative evidence, and unfairly prejudice the state. So I just want to kind of to get your thoughts real quick, both Kiki and Robert. You have people that take the time to relay thoughts and tips on reasonings why they feel somebody could potentially be connected to or a part of a crime of the size of the Idaho4, and you're willing to just overlook it, dismiss it, and not even allow it to be thought about in the future because it's worth to them undue delay and a waste of time. But, you know, it's okay that they run this IGG and you get this tip that comes in, and before that tip came rolling in, there's no substantial evidence that Bryan Kohberger was potentially a perp of this crime. Could there potentially have been call-in tips? Maybe. We don't know. We don't know what, you know, came in as tips. But we do know, based upon exactly what the prosecution states, thousands of tips came in. Is that local community? Is that people in and around other potential suspects that they felt like could have committed a crime like this and maybe even knew knowledge of that? That's pretty scary that you would ignore it and call it a waste of time. And then later, right before trial, just say, hey, we want to keep all of this stuff out because it could potentially showcase the defendant has reasonable doubt. I don't know how you guys feel about it, but I mean, it's really frustrating to me because if these were my children, if these were my brothers and sisters, if this was my family that was left in devastation of a crime of this nature, every tip matters. Every tip matters. You guys' opinions?
Yes, I agree with you. Every tip does matter, and it just seems like, you know, you're right. Stuff's getting suppressed, and especially with that lemonade one, they're basically stacking the deck against Bryan and the defense team, and it sucks. Yeah, it should not even be happening.
I mean, I would just want to say it. I agree with both of you, but it's just back to if you're going to not, it would depend on the alternative suspect. I can see just naming off names and showing a sketchy person with no evidence is unfair prejudice to the state. However, if there's just as much circumstantial evidence against that alternative suspect as the circumstantial evidence that they're using against the person on the stand, I have to say that feels like fair game. And then I just want to repeat two comments that I had seen, kind of Mikey and Miss Potts kind of going back and forth in my chat. But Mikey brings up something that I want to always remember too when I'm analyzing these tips, is initially they were looking for, and it could have been a lie to throw off the perpetrator, but initially they were looking for multiple suspects in an Elantra. That was the initial description. And when there's so much question about the circumstantialness of the video evidence of the car, that could really damage the state's case. And I could see where they specifically want to take away that one tip where they were talking about multiple suspects in the car. And then Miss Potts brings up another point, which for whatever, you know, it's just good information. The FBI took over the tip line. So the tips that came through were scrutinized and documented by the FBI. I think, I mean, I would imagine they probably have a more thorough process than just the regular tip line for MPD, but I don't know. Anyway, just two comments I wanted to bring up, throw those thoughts at you guys and see if you had anything to say about that.
I've been involved in a couple of cases that utilize tip lines both on the federal side of things and also on the state, and they are disorganized. They are not what you would expect them to be, in the manner that they work in the favor of getting to the actual perpetrators and suspects of a crime. They just take as many tips as they possibly can. They forward them up the line to the next person that could potentially review them. And then before you know it, half of them are missing and gone. And then the ones that have been starred for immediate, like, look at this right here, right now, this could potentially lead right directly, they get overlooked probably a quarter of the time as well. So there's numerous times where you think those tip lines are going to be the greatest thing in the world, but you're right. We all watched when they came out and they spoke upon, they wanted to speak directly with individuals of a white Hyundai Elantra, and they just wanted to get some information from them. And at the end of the day, did they ever find those individuals? Or did they narrow it down to an individual through a tip, based off of the IGG, and then just ignore everything that they had asked for help getting? Because thousands of tips through a tip line is probably more like 100,000 tips. They narrowed down to a couple thousand they were willing to even pay attention to. And then how many of those got overlooked and disregarded? And the defense is probably going to want to point at that and try to bring that up in their favor. Like, guys, you guys had literally thousands of tips and you didn't utilize any of them in your investigation. What were you doing? And that's why in this, motion to eliminate by the prosecution, they want that out. They don't want that to be spoken upon when this gets to trial.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I feel like it's a screw job, brother. That's the way I feel. I feel like it's a screw job. Because they had this other person's DNA and they refused to upload it because it would take away the precious DNA from the knife sheath. Yeah, I just feel like Bryan's being screwed.
Kiki, jump in. How do you feel?
I just think that there's no blanket way to take all, in my opinion, and I hope the judge sees it this way, there's no blanket way to take all of these alternative suspect theories away. There's just the case, some of these circumstances might be strong enough to bring up. And I know that one of the problems in other countries, I'll tell a really, really, really quick story. I have some friends that stayed with my husband and I from Brazil several years ago, and I was talking to the wife of the man who works for my husband, and she was telling me she was a constitutional attorney in Brazil. And so we were watching something on Netflix later, and it was like a murder mystery, and I kept saying, like, oh, they should, it was a true story too that happened in Brazil, and I'm like, they should go talk to the people upstairs, or they should go talk to the neighbor. I bet that guy heard something. They should go talk to them. And I'm like, did they ever question the neighbor? And she goes, oh no. And she goes, you can't do that in Brazil. She's like, we don't want to ask people questions because then they become implicated in the crime. So our judicial system is so different, where we just look at everyone around it and see what we can find. In other countries, they limit that. And so it kind of like makes me think about that in this. Like, you could just take any random person and interject them into the case and make them suspect. So I could see why there is a place for this in the courtroom. But knowing that we're dealing with such crazy evidence that would be so persuasive otherwise, unknown DNA, I just don't know how you can just blanket take away all the alternative suspects in this case and not treat each scenario of evidence entered as its own special case. Its own special thing to look at. I just don't think it's a blanket way to take all of this away. There has to be some things that the defense is allowed to bring up if it's just as circumstantial as the evidence they're bringing up against Bryan Kohberger, to be fair.
Well, I also feel like the judge opened that door in the latest hearings when he said Bryan Kohberger could just legitimately be a part of a group of individuals, a group of perpetrators that was, in direct contact with this crime. Well, that means you got to allow the defense to speak about other people, because if you clearly as a judge have made a statement that there's potentially other people involved in this crime, it's gonna look really bad when this is getting ready to go to trial and you say, well, we can't talk about anybody but this defendant. Well, the prosecution should damn well be talking about other people being involved in the crime, if that's potentially what's going on. And in my opinion, and I've always said from the very beginning, I think this is a multi-perp crime. I think they know of multi-perps in this crime, and they're keeping multi-perps quiet and sealed and redacted and kept out of this. And that's poor taste in maybe that's a bad way to summarize it, poor taste, but that's against our rights as individuals. Even if we are guilty as a criminal, our story deserves to be told in the manner of honest and truth and transparency. And if you're willing to hide and disregard certain people being involved in a crime, why didn't you hide and redact the fact I was as well? So it's a scary proposition. And I did want to lead just real quick, because people are talking about more, filings that have been made. There are many more filings, ladies and gentlemen, that are going to be coming to the forefront here very quick. And guess what? Your team with Robert, Kiki, and I are going to be on top of that. We're going to be investigating that. We're going to be diving directly into it. And of course, we're going to be right here with all of you to discuss it, not only sharing our opinions, but listening to yours. So don't think that we're going to overlook more filings like the 911 and the things you guys are discussing, because we absolutely will be.
Oh, yeah. And I saw a motion to release audio recordings. I don't know if it's audio recordings of the trials on the 23rd and 24th, or it could be some different audio recordings. But I did see a motion to release some audio recordings.
Kiki, have you heard anything through your investigative team in regards to that? She's on mute, Robert. She's
You're on
telling us
mute.
exactly how she feels on mute.
Sorry, audience. No, the only audio recordings I've heard referenced are the ones recently that talked about the back and forth with the IGG, which was really interesting. Or not just the IGG, but the audios that were released from the sealed part of the hearing on the 23rd. But did you read that tonight, Robert? Was that in the court docs?
Yes, it's on the Idaho court doc website, and
Okay.
it was from like the middle of this month, and it states that they are talking about releasing some audio.
So because it's also coming out, and it will hit the docs tomorrow and become more visible for everybody to see, even though it's right now, it showcases being released. It just hasn't yet. The defense has filed information in regards to Bryan Kohberger being autistic, and obviously the battle now is going to be back and forth in regards to the mental status and mental health of Bryan Kohberger. And I've already seen people jumping off the deep end on one side of things, stating that the defense is going to try to utilize this to get him off of these charges. Look, the autism itself is an argument and a debate on death penalty cases across the country. This is not new. This is not something that's been sprung onto the prosecution just recently. This is not something they're just learning about. Okay. I've known about Bryan Kohberger's mental status and things going on in his life for a good while now. I just have not spoken upon them because I wanted the process to bring that to light. And now it's going to be coming to light. And I want people to understand this is not a defense that Bryan Kohberger and his defense team are going to go into this trial and try to get him to be found not guilty due to mental illness or anything of that nature. This is a step that happens in all the big cases like this that involve the death penalty. They have to bring these things to light because this is for a judge to weigh out whether the actual death penalty stays on the table or not. This can remove the death penalty from the sentencing guidelines in cases like this. So this is not a fast one by the defense. This is not something that's getting slipped in at the end of the day. It's not. This has been known. We know they had medical records. Everybody was talking about that these medical records had to be for other suspects or other people from the crime scene or this or that. The medical records that are being introduced into this case cannot be for someone like Brent Kopaka unless he was deemed a suspect in this case, which so far we have not seen. They can't. The prosecution's not going to release this information about Dylan or Bethany or any of the victims. This is directly connected and always has been to Bryan Kohberger. This is how these cases work. It's not new. I've known this. I just don't think it was right to speak upon it until it started coming out. But Bryan Kohberger does have mental illness situations, and those medical records are known to both sides. And now this is going to be a part of the discussion when it comes to the death penalty. So just to let everybody know, I did know about this. I don't know if you guys did or not, but now it's been brought out and it's being spoken of. So
I would say it explains a lot. I mean, it explains a lot of little behaviors, particularly when we hear about the mixed accounts of his teaching assistant position. So some people saying that he was ultra talkative, not self-aware. Some people say he was kept to himself. Some people, I mean, it's just so mixed. Some people say he came across as chauvinistic or misogynistic. Other people say that he was great around women and he had study groups filled with women. He worked with women in his office. Robert and I have a discussion about people going on the record saying that going on the record and talking about the potential girlfriend that he had that he was meeting out front of his house. So I think that now that if this is, and you, of course, you have confirmation, when we get complete public confirmation, this can explain some of the behavior changes, such as also it might explain some of the things back at DeSales University when you had that strange account from the person who interjected themselves into the case early on about Bryan at the bar. And what was interesting about that was that when he talks about it, Bryan seemed so surprised and hurt, and he was in agreement with the bar owner when he's like, okay, fine. But it kind of explains the
Sorry, I was watching my wife.
Oh, I realized that. But it does explain his social hardships, like a lot more than saying that he's callous or didn't know. It does give I think it actually softens when it might play a role with the defense, because when the prosecution probably tries to paint Bryan as habit forming or doing this, they can easily come back and say, no, this is kind of it's explained away by this personality trait that he has. I don't know, chat. What do you think? Do you think it'll be, do you think that the defense could use this at all to explain away behavior or anything, or?
Well, I think, and that's one thing, part of the prosecution's strategy in a case like this is they're going to try to paint a picture that gets Bryan Kohberger to being the capable individual that could commit a crime like this. So they're going to showcase through the years the criminal behavior or the mental behavior. Trust me, I always hate to refer to this, but I've been through all this. I've been through all the mental testing. I've been through all the deeming of why I committed crimes. I've been through the mitigation, process and of everything that is transpiring right here, right now in regards to Bryan Kohberger, because outside of building an actual defense for the trial, the defense team is also obligated to find the mitigating circumstances, the factors for those circumstances. They have to do a full medical background. They have to actually deliver all of that over to the prosecution, allow the prosecution's experts and the prosecution's doctors to also do their testing of Bryan Kohberger to make their determinations. So it's not surprising that right before we begin the path to trial, that these things begin to be shown in documents and releasings of filings through the court process, because this is very normal. And people are going to utilize this to try to paint this negative picture of Bryan Kohberger. They're going to say he's mentally sick, he's mentally this, he's mentally that. This happens in every case, whether you turn out to be normal and just an everyday individual. They found all kinds of stuff within my medical diagnoses, my mental, all based upon obviously my birth, my upbringing, foster care, various things. So, I mean, I have mental disease as well, probably in a far different realm than a lot of these people do. But you have to remember, Bryan Kohberger was combating these things in a pretty good manner, in the sense that he was working his way through a PhD program in criminology. He seemed to have some social capabilities, because those that have no social capability couldn't even get on a date in the first place. So he was able to get dates. And I'm not saying that he's mentally 100% stable or not stable. I'm not a doctor. I don't know. But it seems like he was working his way through life. And we all have meltdowns. I mean, shoot, I broke a phone the other day because of a meltdown. I was telling Swamp and Robert not too long ago, I'd completely demolished a laptop over frustration. These are just tendencies that are part of my everyday life and my mental capabilities. I'm not proud of them, but that doesn't mean that I ran out and took 4 people's lives because I was willing to bang on a laptop for an hour, So just let everybody kind of let that sink in. Think about your everyday life. Think about your frustrations, your pains that you feel emotionally from things that hit you, and you overcome them in your own personal ways. And in a situation like this, it's always hard. It's always sad to see, because at the court processor, the prosecution is going to utilize all these little things to paint a very negative picture of not only Bryan Kohberger, but of members of his family. And then the defense is going to have to try to combat it and showcase that those things are a little bit less of a scale than what many think they are. So how do you feel about that, Robert? I mean, I'm sure you've endeavored some of that too.
Yeah, the aggravated robbery charge I got back in 2004, and that went to probation, but I was only on probation for a year. And my probation was 3 years. I was only on probation for a year when I caught my new charge of attempted arson of a building, not a dwelling. I set a big metal freaking dumpster on fire, and it was a dare by my then girlfriend at the time, which thank God we broke up the day I was arrested. but um, but no, yeah, like like I've told you, like I've told you before, brother. There's this one gentleman I was incarcerated with. His charge was murder, but at the same time, they also got him for an SA because he violated his late wife with a stick. So I've seen a lot of I've seen a lot of people. I've seen a lot of people come and go from prison. Like I came and went. I was in there from 2006 to 2008, and but I've never seen in all my years in prison, I've never seen a case like this. Uh, because of how it's being run, and the law enforcement apparently being corrupt. But I've never seen a case like this, and trust me, one of my neighbors in Norton, he was serving it was a 10-year sentence. It was part of a plea deal. He had a year left, and he was going to go do 66 years in vets, because it was him and his brother, and they were some notorious Colombian dealers. and his brother's in Supermax right now. I think they're in Florence, Colorado, and I don't know where he's at, but he showed me all of his paperwork. They were literally snitched on by at least 15 of their associates, and they were caught like 10 miles off the coast of off the coast of the United States, down near Texas, and they were raided by DEA, and they had it freaking all, and they had like at least 20 20 assault type rifles, 150 cal sniper rifle, and 150 cal machine gun. But at the time that he was arrested, his case was a high profile case. They were actually on an episode of the FBI files. But nothing that I've experienced will ever compare to what Bryan's experiencing in that courtroom right now. Because, I mean, all honesty, brother, I feel like he's being railroaded.
And kind of utilizing a little bit of that, Kiki, I have a question for you that I want to ask. Do you feel, out of the thousands of tips that were called in, and this is even before Bryan Kohberger headed back to Pennsylvania, or I'm just talking about in a time frame of when this originally broke and we started working our way through, do you think there's legitimately call-ins pointed at Bryan Kohberger in some way in this case while he was still in the area?
I mean, anything I say is a guess. The only thing I've ever heard, as far as like when I was doing my research, is there is one article that is in it's on an app over a paywall, and I won't bring it up here, but there was rumors that Bryan Kohberger called in a tip that I've heard. But other than that, I don't know. I go back to the fact that we have all of that little timeline I laid out to you about 4 different incidents that would indicate they had his name prior to the IGG tip. And then there's also one other rumor, which I haven't brought up in a long time, which is pretty legit, which is the federal grand juries were like a week after the crime. And apparently in those 71 subpoenas in the grand jury, Bryan Kohberger's name was in those. Because Ann Taylor or Massoff was asking for those in the May 30th hearing. And she goes, you've given us the scope of what's in these 71 subpoenas, but you're not giving us the actual subpoenas. We want the dates. We want to know how you got to our client. Those were her exact words. And in that same hearing, she went on to say, we still don't know how the state got to our client. And they were asking for those dates specifically. And it boils back down to up until December, we never once heard the defense saying that they knew how the state got to Bryan. It was always, we don't know how they got to Bryan. And then all of a sudden we saw a change in Logston wrote in, the state found Bryan Kohberger on the 19th, like stark change from anything they said. It was like a shift almost in their defensive strategy that you could see in real time. And I, again, will go back to what I said earlier, which is with this 19th date that Ann Taylor keeps emphasizing, is this some sort of trap? Does she have something up her sleeve to show, no, there's something else going on? And is she going to attack how they found him? So I don't know. There has to be more, though. It feels like there has to be more that we don't know. Something else. Because if they don't have something else, then we're back down to these arguments with the touch transfer DNA, and that seems like the only solid evidence that they have. I kind of said a lot in that answer.
Well, I find it very interesting, and I'm always a listener, and I love to hear you guys speak. That's why I love working with both of you. But Robert, I'm going to direct this question at you just based upon something that Kiki brought, and I want to get your kind of idea. If Bryan Kohberger literally picked up his phone and made a call into a tip line, what would you think he would have to say? Like, what would he call a tip on and then all of a sudden end up being the main suspect and defendant in the case?
That's a very good question. Why would he call the tip line? I don't know. Maybe, I'm not saying he did it or anything like that. Maybe to throw off the investigation, or him and I'm going to bring his name up. Him and the other BK didn't live that far from each other, and it just makes me wonder if he maybe bumped into Brent or knew Brent somehow, and because Brent was former military. I don't know if he was Marines or Army or what, but I'm not saying Brent did this at all, but maybe Bryan phoned to tip in on Brent, maybe.
Well, and see, that's, based off of listening to Kiki's great explanation of things that she's, walked through this, and then, your thought process to add with that, Robert. And at the end of the day, I'm thinking to myself, if Bryan Kohberger's legitimately trying to fight this case, there's two routes he could fight this case. If I was a defendant, I would know I had two routes to defend myself in a case. One being the route that I know I'm guilty, but I'm going to try to prove either A, I didn't do it by myself, so I should get lesser of a charge. I should get lesser of a crime. Let's say, and this really kind of rings in my head too, and it comes back to Bryan Kohberger. If I could prove that my car legitimately was in the area of this crime scene only for a specific amount of time, and my car never actually stopped driving for more than a split second, that would, in my opinion, show that I dropped somebody off somewhere. So now my defense in my case is, well, I'm going to deflect everything the prosecution's throwing at me because all they're doing is trying to get me to tell on somebody. And I don't want to tell on somebody. So I'm just going to sit here quietly. But the prosecution's going to continue to move forward like they're going to take me to trial with all this evidence to pressure me to tell on somebody. And, is that the case? I don't know. But the other option is Bryan Kohberger knows he didn't commit the crime. It doesn't matter whether he knows who did or didn't or why or how. He just knows he didn't. So he's going to sit back and just allow the defense to work its way through. But, I mean, I could legitimately tell you where we sit right now heading into this trial, even though we're all out here screaming for the things that we're seeing. The courtroom and this judge is not seeing it in the same manner that we are. This judge is not taking the defense's route of deflecting everything in this case away from Bryan Kohberger as serious. I see this judge. He's literally walking this to, well, we're going to trial. It's going to be in front of the jury, and you better be able to prove this. And he's saying prove this to both the prosecution and the defense, but he feels as though the proof is in the prosecution's hands. So it's a very interesting concept to me of Bryan Kohberger possibly calling in a tip, which can be looked at in two different ways. That could either be the biggest mistake he ever made because it could have potentially put him right on Front Street and in the actual view of the investigation, or he was trying to deflect that and pin it somewhere else. And that would be very interesting. How would you go about doing that? What could you potentially say on a tip line, Bryan Kohberger wise, to deflect to somebody else? That, especially if you're a criminology student and you're looking to get into the field, why would you even consider taking that risk?
Can I take that one on for a second? I mean, the first is, as far as calling the tip line, I could see him as a criminology student, as someone who lives just 15 minutes from the crime scene, calling in and saying, hey, I have a white Elantra, I want to get cleared. So that could be one thing. The initial reports that I was talking about that were rumored that were never brought up again, and actually some of them were referenced in a TikTok video that got taken down. So this could be because law enforcement was involved, or it could be because the perpetrator is involved. We don't know. But they were early posts having to do with 4chan, and something about him posting on 4chan, and there was something to do with the tip line. So there was an early tip that had to do with him touching Wi-Fi at a gas station. But that's the only time I ever heard where his name came involved prior. And I hate even bringing up these rumors, so I do apologize, but it was just to answer the question. But I've never heard anything other than that. But if I had to think of a logical reason why he might call the tip line, it might be to clear himself with his white Elantra. And that could have put eyes on him.
I see a comment here in the chat by Aaron Lee. I'm behind in the chat, but I'm also a therapist and just want to say that autism is not a mental illness.
That I agree with. That I agree with. I mean, but it is deemed within the court system, and I know this for absolute fact, it's deemed a method that removes somebody from death penalty eligibility if properly diagnosed and backed up in the court of law. I know that for absolute fact.
Yeah. And
I also, I'm sorry.
Aaron Lee just doubled down to autism is a developmental disorder, not a mental illness.
I heard somebody say earlier, which I think is worth bringing up too. I wrote a note and I forgot to bring it up, but and it might have been Deb Tate, but earlier in the chat when we were initially talking about the autism, it's on a spectrum too. So that's got to be what you were talking about, AR, where they're analyzing it, because clearly with a spectrum disorder, when you have somebody with autism who can accomplish a PhD level teacher's assistant program, it's a different scenario than some, it's a spectrum. So and then the other thing somebody brought up, which we want to keep bringing up, is we don't have public confirmation about the autism. We're just speculating. And of course, AR has inside information.
It's in the documents. It's releasing to the public tomorrow. It's already out on the visual back end of the documentation. People are releasing it in videos already. It's out there. It's known. But I mean, and Aaron, you're absolutely right. I should have been probably a little more careful in my discussion in regards to this, because I understand what the autism is. My mother, my adopted mother, works with autistic children as a therapist, has done it now for 40 something years. And I understand exactly what you're saying. Bryan Kohberger also is deemed to have mental illness. I should have specified that. It's not just autism. There's other stuff involved in this that is mental illness. So I'm sorry that I didn't break that apart and specify that better. But the paperwork right now, the documentation that's hitting the courts and up for debate is based upon the spectrum of autism. So
thank you for clarifying that. And thank you, chat, for weighing in on that too.
I mean,
the chat
and
was
the reason,
wonderful tonight, by the way.
Yeah, they're always amazing. We have some class acts and some great just people not only involved in the chat, but the questions and the conversations that they have are always amazing. And I'm very appreciative of that. Now, I do want to specify too, in Idaho, mental illness does not get you off of the death penalty. Yeah. It's a manner of mitigation to get a judge to set aside the death penalty as a part of the sentencing guidelines. So even if a prosecutor pushes that they want to continue down a death penalty road, they don't want to remove that from their wants for sentencing, a judge can completely change the sentencing guidelines based upon mitigating factors, mitigation based from doctors' scenarios and doctors, descriptions of things and their opinions. So there's a lot that's still going to be weighed out on this. Just remember, even if Bryan Kohberger is found guilty in the court of law in this death penalty case, does not mean the judge will sentence him to the death penalty. So people need to understand that just because you're found guilty does not mean you will get the death penalty.
Now, with the if the judge sentences him to life, can he put in a writ to get moved to, say, a penitentiary closer to his parents, or or will they move him to a completely different penitentiary?
Bryan Kohberger will not serve his DOC time in Idaho unless he is actually found guilty and sentenced to the death penalty. If Bryan Kohberger is given any sentence outside of the death penalty, he will be transferred, just like a Chris Watts, just like many other big name inmates, to a state that they have a transitional contract with. When I was sentenced in Arizona, we had contracts with Indiana, we had contracts with Colorado, we had contracts with other states like Texas, and Oklahoma was a big one as well. Based upon your classification level, you could be eligible to go to a different place. But in Bryan Kohberger's situation, with the popularity and the known issues he would have within an Idaho penitentiary, they would be moving him out of state. They would be transferring him, not maybe for his entire sentence, for a good chunk of the beginning of it.
Now, do you think it would be life without parole or life with parole?
If he's found guilty, he has no option of parole. None. He'll get sentenced. It will be one of those sentences where you see the defendant go before the judge and they say, we're sentencing you to 550 years. And then on this count, we're sentencing you to another 550 years. So in a sense, you're getting life without parole, but they're going to spell it out for everybody to see just how many years within the documentation they want to give them. Take Richard Allen for reference. They've clearly stated the man, it's life without parole, but they said 30 years. They want to make that impact based upon how many years they're giving you, more than, we're sentencing you to life without the possibility of parole.
Well, just like what you and I were discussing that one day, Daryl Brooks apparently getting moved from Wisconsin to Colorado, and I haven't really had a chance to check to see if that was true or not. I just heard that he was moved from Wisconsin to Colorado, and after all, this man's serving 1,000 years in prison.
Yeah, I did look into it, and he's still in his home state. He did not end up going to Colorado.
Okay.
And that doesn't mean he won't. If harm comes to him in a legitimate way, they can make that decision. But at this time, they're not making that decision. Bryan Kohberger would be a totally different situation in that, based upon just the notoriety right there. And because the classification unit is literally right there, and it's a cesspool of not only people going to the penitentiary, but still people in and out through, the classification process and the jail process. They have a very odd way of housing people in Idaho. So with his caliber, if he's not sitting on a death row, he would be in another state pretty quickly.
Yeah, and going back to that, how they were tracking the flight and everything. The way I see it, it was just basically it was a perp walk. Yeah, because every time you saw the media, they were always like, they would parade him in front of the media there in Pennsylvania, and then they tracked his plane, and the media was there every time he got off. It was a perp walk. That's the way I feel. That they wanted this man to feel uncomfortable, and they were showing him off to the entire world. Hey, look, we think we got the guy that did it. So they were doing a perp walk basically for the media.
Well, and Swamp, I'm sure you would actually agree with me, and Robert, you as well. They started that legitimately in Pennsylvania when they took him out of the van, walking him in front of everybody to get him into the jail. They didn't have to do that. They did that intentionally, and they did it with all the chains and the shackles all over him, the bulletproof vests. And this is backed up. It's happening in many other places. And ladies and gentlemen, I've been through the system enough and worn those shackles, have been escorted back and forth to many of court hearings. And they don't perp walk you unless it's intentionally perp walked, and they've done it with Mangione. They've done it now with, Bryan Kohberger. They've done it with many of people now, and it's getting sickening to watch because we need to get back to let's handle people like human beings until if they are deemed to be one of the worst criminals in the world and they're found guilty of that, perp walk them all you want, showcase them as that all you want, but they haven't been found guilty as of yet. And I don't think that we need to display that we as people have gotten this disrespectful as humans towards another, that we have to continuously do this.
Yeah.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I have a question for both of you. If Bryan Kohberger proves that he has some sort of developmental disorder, like autism or mental disorder, does that change the way that he serves out his sentence if convicted?
It can.
Yeah. Sorry, this friggin' my phone just started fucking going off.
Okay. Well, I think then that's probably really important. I don't know why it's being introduced now in the trial phase rather than sentencing phase, if that's the case. But I mean, that's a huge deal, I'm sure, that if he gets convicted right off the bat, they want to say probably if they are allotted special housing for developmental disorders, they're going to want to fight for that.
Here's where you've got to really understand, though. DOC, Department of Corrections, the prison system does not care what you're classified as on the streets. They don't care what your doctors on the streets say. They don't care what the courts determine your mental status is. They don't care about any of that. They do their own evaluations and their own decisions when you get to the classification unit of the penitentiary. They'll do their own testing. They'll check what you have for illnesses, what type of medications, and they'll determine how to house you, how to medicate you, and what they want to do. Anything on the street doesn't mean anything. Nothing.
Okay.
Sadly, here's a prime example. When I got into the Arizona Department of Corrections, I had been an insulin-dependent diabetic since the day of birth. I've taken upwards of 6 shots a day of 3 different insulins. When I got to the classification unit in Arizona, they didn't give me my first shot of insulin for 3 weeks because they were doing all their back and forth determining on whether or not I was a diabetic or not, or how they wanted to medicate me or what they want to do. They changed up all of my medications, and then they deemed that I could no longer take shots multiple times a day. I could only get them twice a day, 12-hour period spread. And so my in-check diabetes prior to going to the penitentiary, that wasn't perfect, but it was decent, got changed to the point that my A1C went into the 50s. My limbs were being risked of being lost. My vision was going. I was just pretty much dying of diabetes, but that's the penitentiary's way of doing things. So anything that Bryan Kohberger's deemed to have right now, the minute he's sentenced to the penitentiary, it all changes.
Can I just ask the audience in the chat right now what AR just said about being denied his insulin in prison? It was something that could force someone to go into blindness almost in 24 hours if got out of control. Do you think that's cruel and unusual punishment? Drop a 1 in the chat if you think so, because I'd be putting 1s in if I was in the chat right now. I'm going to put a 1 in.
I went into ketoacidosis too. After the 3 weeks of not getting insulin, and they finally gave me insulin, I spent the next 5 months in a hospital trying to get my kidneys to function, trying to get my just everything back down. And all they did, because my wife was calling constantly to find out what was going on, she wanted to know where I was at. Was I okay? Was I going to survive? They told her, we don't know whether he's passed or if he's alive. We'll give you a notification. If you're his emergency contact, at some point, we'll let you know what's going on. They never contacted her, and I was in the hospital for months. And when I came out, my foot had broken down the middle of my foot into 18 different pieces. I still have, I'll show it one day. I'll show a picture of my foot. They could not surgically repair it because they took so long when it broke and put me in a left walking boot rather than a right walking boot. So I wore a left walking boot on my right foot, and it's still completely shattered to this day. And the doctors have said they've wanted to remove it. They want to go and amputate, but I've chosen, because I can still put pressure on it, that I want to keep it. But that's been the back and forth. And if I took a picture of my foot, my wife will tell you right now, you'll throw up 3 times before you can say a word if you saw what my foot looked like.
So,
Wow.
so if that's cruel and unusual punishment, you all know that that's unconstitutional, because our Constitution protects us against cruel and unusual punishment. If you're listening to what AR went through, this is what affects 25% of our population, and it affects all the people around them. So before we turn a blind eye on what's going on when somebody gets tossed in the system, realize when you hear these things, if you are a patriot, if you believe in the Constitution, part of that protection is the protection against cruel and unusual punishment. And it's bad enough that we throw people into a jail where they have to fight for their life to just survive in general population. But let alone hearing these things like denying someone medical care, denying someone insulin.
So let me answer real quick. Amy Lou, who asked a great question. Can you sue in a situation like that? Yes, but let me explain to you why it doesn't work. First, your people on the outside have to be able to find a lawyer that's willing to take the case and battle the state and the actual prison systems. You have a 3-year time frame to be able to get in everything into that lawsuit and into the courtroom. For me, once my injuries happened and my diabetes happened, I was already 1.5 years into the situation of battling this before I was even able to speak to my wife about what was going on. By the time she was able to look and try to find lawyers that were willing to travel the 8-hour distance to come talk to me, to even find out what was going on, now we were down to 6 months left in the period of being able to sue. But here's where it all fell apart, because we did find a group of attorneys that 100% wanted to combat this. And Bryan Kohberger will fall into this. He will have this battle too. I guarantee it. By the time we got the lawyers, and we were so short on time, the doctors that worked for the penitentiaries had turned over to a new company. So the documentation that we needed from the original days of the injuries and the insulin issues left with the original company that was taking care of me. And the new company had none of those documents or any of the files to provide to my lawyer. So now our only option was to go combat this blindly in a court of law to try to win a lawsuit. But the case would never even have gotten to the courtroom because they wanted documentation of the injuries, when they happened, how they happened, video of it, the doctor's recommendations, the doctor's care that transpired, and we had none of it. So the lawyer literally looked at me, and I had a very caring lawyer, and he says, you know, the next time this happens, we won't be able to sue then either, because I won't even hear about it until year 3. So that's how they bury it. Some people are lucky. Like, they literally are able to get these documents probably because they had friends in the medical departments and the people working for the yards. You have to realize I was in the hole 90% of my time. I was in disciplinary, area of the penitentiary. Robert, you know this. You don't get to talk to people. You come out of your cell for a couple of minutes. You get to shower twice a week. They don't care about you. They throw you in the darkness, and that's what it is. So for me to get a letter out to my wife, a golf pencil on a half sheet of paper letter sent out, it would take me 3 weeks to get that out. And then to receive something back, whenever they decide to give it to me. So, it's not the same for everybody in the penitentiary. It's not the same for every state. But let me tell you, it's getting worse on a daily basis. And the minute that the doctor looked at me and said, you're considered a terrorist, so if you raise too many issues, if we put you to death, like we go ahead and shoot you on the yard, trust me, there's no recourse. Nobody cares. And I just kind of said, okay, well, I'll go sit in my cell at this point and fight to try to get released. And I still walk. I'll post one day. I'll do something because I do have plans of doing a little more of my stories and showcasing some of the battle wounds that I even have. Guys, I have a stab wound that went through my back that just missed my internal organs that came out the front of my stomach that it took over 100 stitches to close all the way through my body. So you have to factor spine of your back out the belly button. And this was a prison knife that went through me. So the guy's hand was literally inside of me for it to come out the other side. And it took them 6 weeks to get me to an outside doctor to get x-rays. I laid in my cell with bandages that they would come change while I was still bleeding. I have these scars. Like, I could show people the sickness of what happens in the penitentiary. I'm not just one that talks about it like, haha, this is so funny. No, I've lived this. It's scary. And that's why I always tell people, and Kiki and Robert, you know this, anybody that's endured or is currently enduring these types of situations within the penitentiary, whether it be small scale to large scale, reach out to me. I'm ears, and I will help in any possible way I possibly can. And I will get you more knowledge and more routes to be able to combat these things than anybody within your state will do. And I can even recommend lawyers. So Evil CJ has popped in, everybody. Another great creator. I'm glad to see him. I actually
Hi, Evil CJ.
him. I emailed him the other day, and he was so gracious to get back to me. I'm definitely excited to do some work with this man. He has been truly dedicated. I have watched him grow, like miraculously grow his channel, and I'm so impressed with his work ethic and his personality. I can't say enough good things about him. So thank you for joining us.
I can't either. Evil CJ, it's good to see you. I've been on panel with Evil CJ. He graciously invited me on a show when I first started my podcast. So it's nice to see you. I haven't talked to you in a long time. And yeah, your show is great. I've been seeing you do tons of things. I remember watching you when you traveled on site to a missing child's case. It was the Sebastian Rogers case. So yeah, great things on your channel. Good to see you.
Yeah, this man has taken it to the grace of it extents to be boots on the ground, but legitimately doing it in an honest, hardworking, transparent way. It wasn't built upon the want for a substantial income, or he literally did this because he loved doing it and it meant that much to him. And like I said, I still remember back in the day watching him. I wouldn't say he was a small creator because he came out before I did on this platform, and I would venture over and watch him to try to get ideas of where to go and how to do it. And he was a great guider even from afar, but just a good overall individual, just a good person. And, it would be a true honor to be able to work with him. And I look forward to setting that up and be able to do that. So we do have a question here. How much of all these things that YouTube investigators have brought up about this case do you think Bryan Kohberger has seen or heard? I'll let you guys jump in on that one real quick.
That is a very good question. I don't know. Yeah. He could. We did see Ian Taylor do all that stuff about the Facebooks and the YouTubes. Maybe that was the first time he ever seen anything like seen that. Or there was a warrant for YouTube. Maybe he had a YouTube channel before all this stuff went down. So he might have seen or heard about it in maybe the newspaper, if the newspaper is talking about it. I don't know.
Hey, Swamp or Robert, I don't mean to interrupt because it's a great point, but if either of you guys have, I don't see any mods in my channel right now. If you guys have some moderators in your channel, do you mind dropping Evil CJ's link for his channel to give him some love and showcase? And anybody in here that hasn't ventured over to this young man's channel, please do. I highly recommend it. And also just know that, you know, he's a part of this team. The three of us that are here that fully support Evil CJ, and we definitely look forward to working with him as well.
Yes.
I'm getting a link right now. I'll drop it in all of our chats.
This would be my first time
appreciate
working
that.
with Evil CJ too.
He's a very well respected individual, very well respected. So, Kiki, how do you kind of feel? Do you think Bryan K has knowledge of anything happening within the means of social media, even just outside of the YouTube realm? I mean, even any social media.
I mean, I would imagine in this day and age, yes, just because I've heard how other inmates are able, but it obviously it depends on the jail, the incarceration that he's in. But I've heard from other inmates that serve that they have access to social media, and I would imagine that he would look into his case. The one thing I will say is after nearly 3 years gone by, or 2.5 years gone by, mainstream media does not put this case on every day, and where it used to be on every the lead of every hour. And so, I mean, if he isn't allowed to do personalized social media or look for searches himself, the chances of him stumbling onto information about this case in mainstream media is pretty slim. Like, it's just not talked about as much as it was. So unless he has access to an iPad or internet time, I don't really know how he's following his case. So, I mean, he has to have, unless he has some way of searching for articles or something. You know?
The other way he can follow this case is if somebody within his family or somebody within the writing skills writes it personally in a letter. He cannot follow anything that documents his case, whether it be news, TV. Trust me, I've been around the block. They have him blocked from anything that's in regards to his case. Now, what he saw in court, they can't block that from him. So he obviously knows about that. But no, he does not follow his case from his jail. So I do want to jump over real quick because I know you guys have been highly interested in this concept as well. And Evil CJ did ask, what do we think about the DNA dirty gloves?
Well, I saw a comment earlier. It was by Jeff H. over in my side on my chat. Asking, well, how do we know that this wasn't an EMT's gloves? I mean, that's that Chris McDonough found. I mean, that could be a very viable option, but at the same time, why would the EMT just discard his glove? And then they found unknown male DNA inside the glove. Just like they found the unknown male B DNA on the handrail going from the second floor to the first floor. And that still takes me back to when the police got there. The front door was open. The killer or one of the killers could have went down that from the second floor down to the first floor and out the door. So like the multiple perp scenario, you have one that goes out the back sliding glass door, and you have one that goes out the opposite way. But
Kiki, I know. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
I was gonna say, as far as the glove goes, I mean, now they're saying that the glove is not part of the crime scene. How is the glove not part of the crime scene when it was found at the crime scene?
And Kiki, I know you've delved a lot into this. This has been a very interesting topic to you. So why don't you hop in and give your feelings about this?
Okay. I don't know. It's hard to say, Robert, like you said, to categorize where the crime scene was. We know that the crime scene went to the high side of the house. We know that there was a boot print there. We even saw further up going towards Linda Lane where they had luminol or whatever it is, not luminol, the amino black, and they were testing to see if they saw blood up there. So my point is the crime scene was expanded. And I've always thought how it really did kind of upset me that Chris McDonough was close enough to the crime scene where he would spot something several days later and have them expand the crime scene out. I don't know why. Is that because he had connections? He was allowed so close to the crime scene? Like, why was media allowed so close that they would have been able to spot evidence the police hadn't spot yet. And then as far as like an EMT throw, I mean, I don't know if EMTs wear leather gloves, but wouldn't that be the most reckless thing ever to hear an EMT throw a bloody glove? I just can't see that happening, but maybe, I don't know. I don't know what EMT gloves look like. But all in all, when it boils down to it is this, is the prosecution, the investigators said that if they need to test that blood at a later time, they will. So the question I would ask the chat is, what is that if? Like, what would, like, if you need to, why would you need to? Like, what do you need? Like, why don't you test it? What wouldn't you need to test unknown blood at an unsolved crime scene, especially when, depending on when they found that perp, it was more than 4 weeks later. When you have an unknown unaliver, why wouldn't you test every piece of possible evidence, particularly when the evidence count is so low by most people's standards, so they say. 117 pieces of evidence. The few pieces of evidence you have, why not analyze them to the extent that you can, the full extent of the law?
And I do see a comment here. I'm gonna jump in for 2 seconds where someone says the glove is irrelevant, and I do want to welcome Viviana. She is also a content creator that does a very good job of expressing her thoughts and her opinions. I do watch her. I do respect her work, even though we have a little bit of a different view on things and maybe some different thoughts. I think that she's conducted herself and in the discussions that she has in a very respectful way. And I'm always appreciative of when other creators stop by. I tend to disagree. I do understand the opinion that the glove is irrelevant. In my opinion, in a crime scene of this nature, I think everything is relevant, including when law enforcement and investigators are working the actual crime scene. They need to be extremely careful to, one, be protective of their gear and what they could potentially drop or what they could bring from the outside to the inside of the crime scene, meaning contamination issues. I don't know if this crime scene is contaminated. I never got to walk it. I wasn't around it, but I do have issues with someone like Chris McDonough or whoever, they allowed to walk around this crime scene. He should not have been the one finding a glove, whether it's relevant or irrelevant. He shouldn't have been the one to find that. Your investigative team should be on top of every piece of potential evidence that's around that home, whether it stems directly from someone working the crime scene or a potential suspect. I just know through my history, through my appearances within a court setting, anything that had blood, DNA, fingerprints, sweat, semen, anything was investigated. It was tested, and it was deemed to either be a part of the crime or excluded based upon who they connected it to. Please tell me in some sort of way, if that glove is irrelevant, why is it irrelevant if you can't tell me who it's connected to, where it came from, how long it was there, why did they find blood within it, whose blood is it, why is it not in an evidentiary locker being tested heart and soul to figure out everything that hooks to that? I'm sorry. I'm just a firm believer anything that's potentially found at a crime scene should be investigated, because your answer can be found in the smallest of things. Like they're trying to claim the DNA on the knife sheath up underneath the button snap that was literally so small, but they deem that to be the holy grail of evidence in this case. Well, who's to tell me the blood on the handrail or the blood found in a glove or the footprints found a block away don't have some meaning to this case? Don't rule out one thing and put all your credence in something else. That doesn't make sense to me. It never will make sense to me. And I appreciate Evil CJ for bringing up the idea of the glove, because that glove that they're discussing is not the one found by Chris McDonough. I mean, come on. It's not. It's a different glove.
Yeah, because she just stated Chris found a different one. One was found on the 20th, and then Chris found one on the 24th. Right. That don't make no sense.
I thought we were
Right.
talking about the Chris McDonough glove. I thought we were talking about it found at the crime scene, because there definitely were two gloves, and I'm glad that somebody in the chat clarified that too.
Yeah.
But I think when you're saying AR, I just want to back up what you're saying, because the most infamous quote to come out of this case in the last 30 days, which was DNA, along the lines of DNA is DNA every day and even twice on Sunday. So if DNA is DNA every day and twice on Sunday at a crime scene, for probable cause, why isn't this DNA twice on Sunday?
I just want to make a quick point, just real quick, and this isn't disrespectful towards anybody. I'm not pointing at anybody, but I want to make just a simple kind of observational, opinionated statement. When you look at people like myself that come to the platform, and I'm an ex-criminal and I've got a criminal history and a background and things of that nature, people can tend to look at me as if I'm discredited because of my past actions or things I've done, or maybe I'm just not as knowledgeable about things as others that have degrees and training and these different things. Yet when I watch on the platform, the one thing that really stirs me up and gets my stomach twisted is when I watch these so-called ex-professionals that worked within a profession. Let's just utilize the concept law enforcement or investigators, and the things that are coming out of their verbiage to try to make sense of a case like the Idaho4, I can look at through my past experiences and my knowledge of being around the block and say, that's just not true. Like, that's false information, that's misleading, that's misguiding. And yet the people want to look at me and discredit what I have to say, when literally I just sit here before all of you and speak upon my experience and the knowledge that I've gained, and the willingness to come out and be honest about my negative walk through life. But why is it okay that continuously every day we're talking about these law enforcement people that have retired, and nobody's shaking their head back and forth? Well, some of us are, but nobody's shaking their head back and forth going, well, that doesn't make sense. That's just that. Chris McDonough found a glove at a crime scene, Idaho, and you know, he doesn't, first of all, find that as an ex-criminal investigator as a problem that he's finding discarded bloody gloves around a crime scene days or weeks after, and that's not an issue. Like, we watched the photographs of the crime scene teams that were working the crime scene throwing their discarded items on the ground. I'm sorry, you don't do that. Like, you don't do that. I know that just based upon my past. You don't do that. I can't tell you whether the blood evidence found at the crime scene has any meaning to this crime whatsoever. I don't know. I would hope that the people that found it and tested it and investigate. Oh, wait, they didn't, because the lead detective of the case, Payne, said that he didn't even know you could run various samples through CODIS, so he was afraid to take out one sample of the knife sheath to run. I mean, come on. These statements are being made. They're off. They're off base. And like I said, I give a lot of respect to Viviana. I do watch her videos, and she has some very interesting and very detailed information that even I myself would miss. Like, it's like, wow, that's really good information. And I know people dig into this, but across the board, we still have to hold the investigation teams and the people working these cases accountable. We have to make sure that people that could potentially get the death penalty sentence based upon these investigations get the fair shake of a fair investigation. And I'm one that will speak volumes upon that. If I see something that's happening, Chris McDonough should have been nowhere near a damn quadruple homicide crime scene to find anything. Nothing. That's like them letting me in the crime scene to wander around, and then trusting me that I'm not going to take pictures or share what I see or what I do. I mean, come on. That I'm sorry, I got to mute myself.
I wanted to make one comment. Just, I've heard this, and I want to relay this sentiment because I think about this a lot with Ann Taylor in these motions. Her job isn't just to defend Bryan Kohberger. Her job is to stop also the heavy hand of the state, from coming down too heavy on her client. That is also one of her job descriptions. And I wanted to bring up Detective Mowry made a really nice comment at 11:52 that I just thought echoed what you said, but very well. He said, AR got his degrees from the streets. In all honesty, it can be one of the best sources of education. So I just wanted to pass that on to you from Detective Mowry, not the real Detective Mowry, for those watching at home.
There's a comment by Evil CJ made at 10:53. Yeah, these gloves, I'm talking, were on drone tape before they were sent, before they went inside to touch items from crime scene. Well, he made another one here. These gloves will be shown in trial from investigators on tape having contaminated equipment.
Right. And you know, one thing, if we all just kind of set aside our differences of opinion when it comes to guilt or innocence, and we just literally think about crime scene investigations that we've watched across our lifespans and all of our interests when it comes to true crime. And the number one thing that you would always hear when a case is approaching or getting to trial, is there potential contamination, not only within the crime scene, but within the evidence around the crime scene? It is always one of the biggest battles when you get into these cases, because it's hard to tell if something's been contaminated or if it has not been contaminated. But I agree with CJ. When I can see actual footage of everything scattered on the ground around crime scene technicians and the very vehicles that they brought to the crime scene. Remember that. They brought this stuff to the crime scene. This isn't just people that could be victims or friends of the victims. This is the crime scene technicians, and they're preparing themselves to work their way into a devastating crime scene. And there's issues that could really just slam you in the side of the head with contamination. In a lot of cases, the very people that are shaking off the contamination in this case and saying none of this matters, if you get over to another high profile case, maybe a white collar person that bit the dust and it wasn't something like this, all of that contamination would matter for some reason. All of that would be spoken about and would be mentioned, and it would be something very important. O.J. Simpson, the glove that didn't fit, was so darn important in that case. But now we're talking about a glove that's found at a crime scene. I don't care if that was an actual worker of the crime scene, a technician. Show me the proof. Show me you tested it. Show me that you've disqualified that person through a connection. I don't care. Anything like that means something to me, because I've been at that defense table sitting in that defendant's chair, and I've been accused of things I didn't do. And I want that fair shake that you better, even if I did do it, you better damn well be able to prove it. And you better be able to prove it through good investigation and transparent means, because if not, I have the right to attack that and discredit you.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I kind of take credence when people say things in and around a crime scene don't matter. I'm sorry, in a quadruple homicide, the blood matters.
Right.
The blood splatter matters. The knife sheath matters. Everything about this situation matters. To me, it matters. And that's why the investigation should have been better done. And I know they're rolling in, ladies and gentlemen, they're rolling in that big model of the crime scene on those wheels on a cart into the courtroom. And that's what the motion, is all about by the prosecution. They're going to bring this whole 3D model of the house. Why didn't you just leave the house?
Yeah. There was a comment by FFSBV on it. I still can't believe people believe that the glove not fitting shtick. Talking about the O.J. Simpson thing, I guess. I don't know.
All I know is at the end of the day, I'm sorry to cut you off, Kiki. I
You're
want to
fine.
get to you. At the end of the day, O.J. Simpson went home. He was found not guilty of a crime that he potentially very well committed. Okay. Many in their lifetimes thinks he committed that crime. Another devastating loss of life. Took the life of his wife, potentially. But guess what? At the end of the day, he was found not guilty because the evidence wasn't handled properly. And a very guilty man potentially walked out and went home. And I'm sorry, in the Idaho4 case, when I look at potential evidence like blood on a handrail or a glove found outside, I think it needs to be proven why it was there, who it was there by, and then discredit whether they had involvement or not from that point. That's called investigation. That's called an investigation. And at the end of the day, Ann Taylor stated it in court directly to a judge. No investigation happened. And IGG was sent off and brought back.
Yeah.
No IGG happened. I think that's pretty clear cut. That's a pretty solid statement. Sorry, Kiki. It's your platform. Go for it.
Okay, I just want to make one quick point when you guys were talking about the investigators and the PPE, okay, and dropping the booty. We all saw that in the drone footage and everything. There were a couple points brought up about, I just recalled, brought up about PPE by Nothing Hath Asked. I don't know if your channel, but if you've heard of her channel, but she does true crime. It's all Idaho4 related, and she does a lot of improv and comedy in her videos. They're really good and they're really entertaining. But she brought some really good points up about PPE in an article she was reading. I don't know, this is a few weeks back. And she brought up, she just went on to Copilot, one of the AIs, and she asked them about PPE in the Idaho4 case. And some of the interesting things that AI brought up that I just like to bring up in this live stream are, in a lot of crime scenes, there were things that she didn't see in this crime scene as far as PPE, which means personal protective equipment, such as mats. Like when you go in and out of a crime scene, you have these special mats you wipe your feet on as you go in and as you come out, because not only do you want to prevent things from outside world getting into the crime scene, but you also want to prevent the crime scene from coming out into the real world. And those mats were clearly not there. The other part of PPE she brought up that she didn't see, and there probably were more points, because like I said, this is a few weeks ago, she talked about it, but she brought up hairnets. And that is another thing that's weird. We didn't see, you can't always see a hairnet, but we didn't see hairnets. Now, both of those points could be irrelevant to the case, but the overall point that she's making is knowing these visible things that were absent as far as the PPE, what don't we know? You know, these are what we can see. We can see the booty dropping on the ground. We can see the no mats. We can see probably no hairnets. What else don't we know? What don't we know that was inside those doors? And so it's back to that the questions that we all have and we can't get answers to because the case is so sealed and gagged and redacted. But it's one of those lingering things that keeps bringing up questions in our mind and keeps all of us talking. And I really do hope we get answers to these things when the trial comes.
You know, what I was going to say was, it goes back to, now I'm not blaming Dylan or Bethany, don't get me wrong, because, they've been through a lot over the last, 2.5 years, almost 3 years. But here's the thing. How can you not smell the blood in the home? And trust me, I watch a lot of Joe Kenda, and blood has a unique smell, especially when it's outside of the body decaying. It almost smells like it smells like a coppery smell. How can they not smell that? If this was like a really grisly crime scene, like we always hearing. How can two people in the home not smell that coming from not only the second floor, where of course Dylan's bedroom was, but the third floor?
And I'll kind of lead a little bit add to that, and I'm not trying to make anybody just like sick to their stomach or anything, but when I was incarcerated in Rincon Unit in Tucson, Arizona, you kind of have to imagine like cell runs. They're 2-man cells. There's 20 on each side. And you know, I don't know if I can bring up a picture, but so you got cells across from each other all the way down, and you got 20 cells on each side. But anyway, a situation arose about 3 cells down from where I was being housed at. I was a single man cell, and then other people were able to have a cellmate. I wasn't, but you could hear the altercation happen down the hallway, and a young man lost his life. He was stabbed, and so it took a while for the medical people to get there, and obviously he lost his life, but they just kind of drug him out into the center of the hallway where everybody walked to go to and from chow, and they covered it up with I guess like a tarp or a sheet or something. But the whole point of it is that they left him there for a little over 12 hours. Within hours, I want to say 1 or 2 hours, you could begin to smell it. And then after a couple more hours, it got even more reek and foul. And then I'm telling you, by the time it hit 8 hours, you were holding your towels and whatever clothing in your cell you could over your mouth, because it was disgusting. And the body loses its fluids and the blood, and the things just happen. And it, you know, for someone to say you don't smell that, you have to imagine me being in like a fish tank with a sliding door, and there's not a lot of air coming in and out of these cells. So, you know, it's almost like a home in the sense that I probably just have more of actual protection from the smell than someone in a home would. And it's disgusting. So I don't want to question anybody, because I don't know. I don't even know if the young ladies were in the house for more than 20 minutes after this crime happened. I don't know. I can't tell you the story, and I don't want to be the one that ventures to trying to tell a story that I don't know. But, you know, getting back to the evidence and the collection of it, I think it's extremely important. I think that this is going to be a very interesting, when we get to trial, it's going to be an interesting demonstration by both sides, because I know the prosecution is going to bring in their 3D designed home, and they're going to walk people through a virtual crime scene, which to me just doesn't give you the feel. It doesn't give you the sense of what you're really diving into when it comes to a crime scene like this. But I know this is probably the best potential way to do that. But you also have to think to yourself, you know, how devastating was this actual crime scene, and how are we going to know? Because the defense is going to put on the idea of contamination. There's no doubt about it, especially with us knowing that people arrived to this crime scene before law enforcement did. That's going to add to it. And that's going to give firepower to the defense, whether it's warranted or not. It's going to give firepower to them, and they're going to utilize that. And I'm interested in watching, and I just want to see how people take this crime scene and the potential of contamination within this crime scene, and the lack of maybe the testing of certain things compared to other cases where, you know, they demanded those things be tested and they demanded those things be explained. Is it going to be the same thing here? Are we going to see that same thing? Because I see many writing it off as if it's nothing. And then I myself come back in, because I've been around the block of these types of, you know, really bad situations like this, unfortunately, where people lose their lives and things of that nature. And I just think everything should be exhausted when it comes to an investigation. And when people say, well, you got to think about the financial ramifications of that. Well, I am thinking of the financial ramifications. I would have rather seen the investigation portion of this case take up the financial ramifications than a 3-year standoff waiting to go to trial that's costing the taxpayers millions upon millions of dollars. And there's still so many questions that are not being answered. So it's just my thought, just my opinion. And Viviana, again, I definitely appreciate you stopping by. And, the respect that's always carried out in our chats is amazing. And I appreciate even the people that come in here that have a different point of view, different thought process. The discussions are amazing. They're thought provoking. And I definitely thank all of you for that. So.
Can I wanted to weigh in on the bloods thing while we have Evil CJ in the comments, because he told me something a while back that I had never heard before. And I'm sorry, I'm not speaking for you, CJ. If I get this wrong, please correct me in the chat. But CJ was telling me and Gia a story about he had a job many years ago. I don't recall exactly what it involved, but he ended up smelling, he ended up smelling some of these crime scenes for whatever reason. And one of the things is, it's not, when you say it's not just blood, and this is a major trigger warning for everyone watching, this is a late night show, but the injuries that were described went through organs. And that in itself has a very unique and noxious smell. And again, Evil CJ would be able to speak for it better than me, but what he was saying is these odors are different than blood, and they permeate everything when you talk about. So anyway, I don't need to elaborate on that. So I just wanted to bring that up too. But then on a counter argument, we did hear the verbiage stating that this sliding glass door was confirmed to have been open. So I don't know how much of the smell that takes out of the house. And then we have the non-official source confirmation, which again, it's not in the police record. It's something that was said by a neighbor and caught by Fox News, but that the front door was open at 8:30, which we don't know if it's true, but we know at least one set of the doors was open, the sliding glass doors. So that could have taken away some of the smell, but I'd love to hear maybe a little bit from Evil CJ. Do you think the doors open would have taken care of that noxious smell you described to us? Or
Evil CJ says it fast tracks the scent.
Yeah, I was going to say it spreads it quicker. And the one thing I do want to say real quick before I jump over to you, Robert, is Evil CJ, let's set something up. I want to have you either we join you over on your panel, or you join us on this panel, or we dual stream, whatever you would like to do. I want to pick your brain. I want to have a great discussion. I think this is a great thing to discuss because you have actual, background and experience in this. And I just, I want to give you the platform to be able to speak and share your thoughts in the proper manner. So I know Robert and Kiki are probably in the same mindset. We would love to work directly with you on a panel and actually have this conversation, have a good time with it. So let's set that up. I know we've discussed it, CJ, but let's actually make that happen and make it happen in a reasonable amount of time before I forget everything that I have on my brain.
Well, I was gonna say something that was top of my head, but now it's gone.
And my plot worked. Woohoo! No, and that's the thing, is there's so much to discuss in regards to this case, and we've literally been going almost 3 hours. Kiki and Robert.
CJ wants to come up, brother.
Okay, let me hold on one sec. Give me a sec, and I'll see.
Well, while you're doing that, I want to say Mikey just gifted a membership to a Convict's Thoughts. Mikey, thank you for the blessing. Thank you for all the blessings on my side. I was trying to keep up as they went. We just want to also take a moment to thank our mods. We really appreciate you keeping the chat clean. You keep the chat hyped. You keep the conversation rich, and we appreciate everything you do. Mostly, we appreciate your time. Thank you for being here. So,
Yes.
CJ, I'm dropping you the link right now, and you know, I do have to apologize to everybody. My mods are actually on panel with me right now. So,
I'm not a mod yet, brother.
oh well, you will be. I don't know why you're not, but you know that's the thing is I don't really have mods, so I apologize if there's any craziness or anything of that nature. But I do invite. I dropped the link down there for you, CJ. If you'd like to join us, you're more than welcome to. We always love having good voice. So he is
Yes.
here. I am Mr. CJ.
hey, CJ.
Hey, what's up? Thank you,
How are
buddy.
you?
Thank you for the kind words, first of all of you guys. I really appreciate it. Number one. And yeah, that the smell, I would imagine, so this is the scenario I have when it comes to the smell and when it comes to the people that supposedly showed up before law enforcement, and I'll get into a little bit more of that too, because with when President Green put out that book, he admitted that they had sent out a crisis team to all the fraternities and the sororities. If you dig into the volunteer program for the university and the fraternity and the sororities, basically the volunteers that are students work from the weekdays from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 7 in the morning. So they handle all the night calls during the week, and during the weekend, the volunteers are the ones that work both the morning and the night shift. And so students, volunteers were the first ones to show up to the crime scene. The president sent out a crisis team before law enforcement even showed up, and they have a protocol. It's something that when I went out there for the year anniversary and I started to kind of feel the atmosphere, I felt like there was more of a connection with the university and the first responders. So when I started digging into it, there's actually a protocol. If you look up Sigma Chi's protocol for Moscow, there is a protocol that they have where they have to come up with their own crisis. What's the word? It's almost like a they basically police themselves. So you know how, like, when you're looking at the law enforcement and how you see a lot of the no reports, it kind of goes the same direction where they try and keep their reports down as well, because they want to make sure that they get the funding from the state and the government for having a positive campus. And so they have their own, yes, crisis management. They have their own crisis management. You can look it up in the Sigma Chi. There's a handbook that they have for it. And they have certain steps that they have to follow when certain things like this happen. So if you're having student volunteers showing up as first responders, and you're having people go out there as a crisis team to go out to all these fraternities and sororities, well, then you have a vested interest in each other to make sure that the no reports exist. You want the call volume because that brings in more funding, but you don't want the negativity that comes with the volume, because then that looks bad on your university and you don't get as much funding. It's almost like when an elementary school will, if anybody's has any children that have been bullied in school, and the school tries to downplay the bullying as far down as elementary, it's all about the funding. And so when you apply that and then you apply it to the university and you see the kind of money that Sigma Chi makes for the university, almost $500,000 just a couple years ago in donations just for the University of Idaho alone. They have a vested interest, just like the law enforcement, keep the reports down, the negativity down, but keep the volume up so you get the funding. So when they show up, the reason that the doors were probably open was because, number one, I don't know how any of them would have been able to breathe inside that house. When you're talking about 4 victims, You're talking about the brutality of the crime. You're talking about all those toxic chemicals inside organs that it's, when you're talking about liquid always seeks the easiest path out. And so when you're talking about the liquid inside your body, it's going to find the easiest path out. And so all of those chemicals that are in your liver and, that digest things in your body, when those chemicals get out and then they mix with everything else, it creates a certain scent. And I don't know how anybody would be able to breathe. I'm sure the doors were open and people, I don't know how they even slept, honestly. When you're talking about, supposedly students, they were sleeping in there, BF and DM supposedly sleeping. I don't know how you could sleep in there after an hour, because when you're talking about the second floor, the third floor, that's one thing, because a lot of that is kept upstairs and some of it is going to come downstairs because of the potency. It just takes time. But when you're talking about the second floor and you're talking about where Xana was found and you're talking about where Ethan was found and you're talking about their injuries too, I don't know how. It's only a half wall that goes down to Bethany's room. It's only 10 feet to Dylan's door. And I don't know how they could still sleep during those smells. The door being open, I see a bunch of the Sigma Chi first responder volunteers showing up. None of them have ever been prepared for something like this. It's not a smell that you can duplicate. It's not a smell that you could even describe. The only thing I can describe is the potency. And I could see the doors being open and each one of them thinking that they're man enough to go in there. And then they make it up a couple steps and they got to come running out because they can't breathe and they're about to puke. I think that's why it took 4 hours. I don't understand why it took 4 hours to show up when their office, their department is literally just a couple minutes down from the house. I don't understand why it took that long. But the reason I think it might have taken that long is because the volunteers are responsible for policing themselves. And they needed to come up with some kind of crisis plan, and they weren't able to because none of them were able to go in there for an extended period of time until it did air out a little bit, until they were able to finally go in there and figure out what was going on. Because if we remember, we go back to the beginning of the stuff we heard about the 911 call and how it came from somebody that wasn't living in the house. We've also heard things about an unconscious person. We've also heard things, stories about how Bethany couldn't talk and she was mumbling, and we heard stories of DM passing out on the ground, and that's why they called for the unconscious person as well. And I think that's what took place. I think they both were in so much shock. They probably walked up to the second floor, or Dylan said, "There's something on the floor right there." I'm not going to be graphic. They go downstairs and Dylan has most of the smell inside of her nose. And so she's going to be passed out on the ground because she couldn't even breathe because of how potent it was, and probably puking and all this other stuff because of the smell. Bethany, seeing the reaction of Dylan, smelling the smell, probably going up just to peek around just real quick. And that's why she couldn't even make out any words for anybody to know what was going on. And so it was up to them to go inside. And I think that's why it took so long. But the smell, doors being open, you're just think like if you burn some carpet, all right? A house fire. Think of a house fire. How long does it take for that smell to get out? You got to have fans in your windows. You got to have air filtration stuff going. I mean, this is something that probably would have taken. Just think about if you paint your room in your house, how long you smell that paint. And that's just paint.
Yeah, I mean, your explanation of it's spot on, and I don't think I've been in a situation that would be as devastating as a quadruple homicide, but I've definitely been around loss of life and loss of life in a manner where the body was opened, where it was bleeding, and it's not even just blood. There's so much more to it than that, that even people that want to act tough and act like we can handle anything and everything literally, couldn't handle ourselves, and we were puking and hiding and wrapping our face and things. So I can definitely imagine, just based upon the way you described that, and I appreciate the way you did that, CJ, is it gives you a visual, but it also gives you that sense in your stomach where you can almost feel it without actually smelling it. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, and it's not even red. Like, this liquid is like, it almost looks like Mountain Dew when it comes out of your body like that. It's a very interesting color as well, and it's so potent. You just can. I don't. If anybody could describe it, I'd love for them, because I've never been able to come up with a word description to describe that smell. I just know what happened to me, and when you're looking at, they're used to just noise complaints and showing up for people that are too intoxicated, probably showing up for some ODs. They just didn't have it out there. No report. With that kind of crime, like, how many times do you hear of that crime happening anywhere? And that's the severity of it. And so when it comes to you're used to this going on for so long, you're in the middle of nowhere, you're not even a big city, so you're not even really experiencing crime at its fullest, and then you're getting thrown into a crime that took place that you never even imagined would be possible where you're at, because that stuff happens in big cities. It don't happen here. And the inexperience is what I think contributed to it too, and no fault of their own. I mean, it's not their fault that they didn't have these crimes happening all over the place in their city, but you have to be honest too. Experience does come into the equation as well.
Well, I would have to say, with that, to kind of add credence to that, I don't even think anybody that works for their law enforcement teams had any experience in it, anything that remotely came close to this. I'm not even sure the prosecution or the actual defense teams have ever been around something like this. So there's no doubt, even someone like myself has a criminal history that's never experienced something like this. I couldn't walk into something like this and handle it as well as somebody from maybe Chicago or New York that's been around these types of crime scenes and really explored, and the expertise that they get from that. I personally wouldn't have been able to handle this crime scene. I'm the first one to admit it. I would have turned around, walked right back out of the house, shaking my head, going, I'm not going in there. I'm not looking at that. No way, and I've been around a lot. So,
well, think about Lanier. When he first showed up, he said, before he even got out of the car, he said he knew he wasn't going to be able to handle the situation and called in Idaho State Police.
Right.
And that's the second in command for Moscow PD. He had the second most experience.
Yeah. Well, and I think you would probably agree, and probably all of us on panel, when you're making Payne the lead detective of this case after 24 hours, based upon his past, investigative history and things of that nature, you're kind of a bad creek to be able to get this solved in an appropriate manner. So,
yeah, they're just used to, noise complaints and stuff. But when it come to the glove, I wasn't talking about Chris McDonough's glove. These were gloves that were contaminated already. They then touched all of the equipment, opened up the bag of the equipment that goes inside, and rubbed all that contamination over the equipment. And so when you see them contaminating the equipment, and it's not just the glove, I call it the dirty DNA glove because that's where it started. But if you watch the drone and you see all the equipment that they touch, and it's the same equipment that then I show photos, and there's a video too, where you can see them using that same equipment to document the crime scene. And when you're there to document the crime scene, you're also there to potentially pick up items from the crime scene to further document them after you already documented them where they're at. And that's where I'm saying the possibility of contamination could have existed, because it's one thing if, you know, if you pick up something and it's contaminated and then you're touching all your equipment and then you change your gloves, well, you still have to go back to the equipment because you're also touching that equipment with different gloves when you're inside. And when you're touching that equipment, Vinny had a great picture and I screenshotted it. It has him showing him opening the button snap of the sheath. And the way he's opening the button snap of the sheath, who's to say the same investigator that went in there with the contaminated equipment also didn't touch the knife sheath the way that he's holding it? And there's your transfer.
Right. Yeah, and I think many things that I hear, and I want Robert and Swamp to be able to talk to you as well. It's great to have you, by the way, CJ. It's amazing
thank
to
you.
see someone, you know, with the intelligence and the content creation in a respectful way join us. That's what we strive for. So
Yes.
I know not only am I excited about it, but Swamp and Robert are as well. So
Yes, this is my
Thank
first
you.
time on panel with you, CJ.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, go ahead.
But at the end of the day, before I pass it off to you guys to kind of continue, I a lot of times when I think contamination of a crime scene, I don't even look at contamination via the kids in and out or even potential suspects of the crime. I'm looking directly at the people working the crime scene from law enforcement, the investigative standpoint, the way that they handle all of their equipment, their their PPEs, everything of that nature. Because if we're talking about, let's just utilize the idea of transferable DNA. It's not hard to transfer in the first place, but if you're not working with the proper PPE procedures and the protection of a crime scene, it makes it even easier to do. And at the end of the day, that's why some people are talking about the case of the guy that admitted to potentially committed a crime, and then it was later found that he was never even near it. It was touch DNA that showed up there through, the 911 people that actually transferred it, within that case. So I absolutely agree, and that's why I just shake my head. And if I'm watching this through the trial proceedings, I know I'm going to bang my head on the wall when I go, there's just so much out there that could potentially be, just reasonable doubt. And I get it. We want this crime solved, and that's why we continue to talk about it. And, at the end of the day, are we ever going to just have the truth? So with that, I'll pass that on to you guys. And
Mark Carver's a good case too, if you don't know, because he was fishing down like a couple hundred yards from a lady that was found in her car unalived. The officer went to interview him, shook his hand, and then the officer touched the back door, and they used that touch DNA to convict this guy. And Barry Shep was part of the team that got this guy off 10 years later based on the same DNA that was used to convict him. So it does happen.
Yeah, and there's a case right now going on in Colorado. She was a top CBI forensic scientist, and she was charged with 102 felonies because it come to find out that she had deviated from the standard protocols and cut corners in the IgG profiles in over 3,000 cases. And it was discovered by an intern there in the CBI. So they went and checked her books while she was, I guess, out of state, and they found out that she had basically manipulated and altered DNA by deviating from the standard protocols and cutting corners. And it's gonna cost them $7.5 million to retest all the samples that she had her hands on. And they're looking at basically over 3,000 cases where possibly about 809 of those cases, the people were innocent that were tried and convicted because she had cut corners and she was a top Colorado Bureau of Investigation forensic scientist, and they answer to the FBI, the CBI does.
Mm-hmm.
And she's looking at cyber crimes and a whole bunch of other stuff. Yeah, it's 102 felonies. Her name is Yvonne Woods, or Missy Woods, and she's looking at a lot of time, especially with the fact that it's going to cost them $3 million to retest, and this is per test.
Mm-hmm.
So $7.5 million to test 3,000, retest 3,000 DNA samples, and that's $3.5 million for each test that they have to do, going over the 3,000 cases that she had her hands on.
And all of those families are farther away from justice than they were the day before, and that's the most unfortunate part about it.
Yeah.
All of those families, they...
That's what scares me about this case too, is, I take a step back because I'm learning in my older age, CJ, my actions affected so many people, including my own family and, my victims' families and people of that nature. So as I'm getting older, I'm learning the meaning behind that. So I take a step back, not only in a case like this, but other cases. And I looked at, the victims' families, and it's just like, I want you guys to have some peace that this thing was properly investigated, handled, and the respect was given to not only your children, but the community around it, that at the end of the day, the right person or people are locked up and getting, the absolute justice. And right now, just something sits, CJ, within me that I'm looking at this, and I just don't feel that way. And I don't feel like the families feel that way, even though they're coming out and they're trying to be supportive. At the end of the day, behind closed scenes, I don't think they're 100% sure either. And that creates a really scary scenario in a large case like this.
It is, because you see the way that Christy G is right now and has been for the last 6 months, compared to the other interviews from the beginning. Steve in the very beginning was the one that was giving the public information because law enforcement wasn't. And he got a lot of heat from it back then because he was out there talking, and thank God, because without Steve, we wouldn't have known about the grub truck video. We wouldn't have known about a lot of this other stuff. But when you see Christy, and that's what hurts the most, dude. And that's why I try and do everything that I can, because I would hope that if I'm ever in that position one day, kind of like how you reflected and you're doing like a 150 back, you know what I mean? You understood what you did, how it affected people, and now you want to go 150, giving them more of you because you want to make up for what you did in the past. And when you're looking at this and you're seeing how broke down she is during these interviews, and that she is just holding on to BKB and the guy, and it's almost like you see Steve kind of like going, okay, because he was the one that was questioning, don't make me be the alpha investigators, he was the one that was questioning everything. But now it's like it's almost like I feel like he's got to go along with her, because I can imagine the fights at the dinner table if she's like saying it's him and he's saying what he said 6 months ago in an interview, where I just want the right person to be caught. And you could tell he had some questions about if it really was him or not, because some things don't make sense to a lot of people. That's why we discuss them. But where it's at now, it's like, man, I can't imagine. He's probably doing everything he can to make sure that she pulls together. And man, that's the hardest part, is if they didn't do this, I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know if BK did it or not. I wasn't there. But what I do know is I see a lot of things that didn't take place that should have taken place, if that's what your job is to do. And if it's about getting the ultimate truth and justice for these victims, you should be approaching it that way, no matter what position you hold. And if you don't hold it that way, and you do the cut corners and you do all this other stuff, and you allow things to take place, when it comes to simple mistakes, if you allow things to take place and that affects the outcome of the truth and justice for that family. Like I feel so bad for Christy, and what would I can't imagine what she's going to go through if it's not BK. I don't know if she's going to make it. I mean, she is so broke down, and so it's got to be him or nobody. You see it from the post that she posts on their Facebook page. It's just all tied to him, and so you know, when they're not about the truth and justice for the victims, because really, if somebody is getting convicted and they get set free later on, you are so far away from truth and justice than you were when the crime took place. You went backward, and to do that to a family when you're the one that signed up to do the job you're doing, you're the one that signed up to show up to those calls if they take place. You're the one that signed up to get the training to be able to do this stuff the way you're supposed to do, to make sure that everything is done properly. And the fact that you rely on somebody else to do the job that should have been done, that's a horrible feeling, because you feel helpless at the same time. And then how do you feel at that point?
I agree. Swamp, you've been pretty quiet over there. Why don't you jump in? She's muted.
You're muted.
I just want to reflect kind of a few things like what CJ's saying about Christy, and and you're talking about how she's so convinced, and she shows it publicly. She shows it in her posts. She shows it in her interviews. But I think back to that one interview we've been touching base on this morning, which is when they told us that they found, Christy let us know that law enforcement let her and her husband know on the 13th of December Bryan Kohberger's name, or that they were circulating his name. And in that interview, she talks about her interactions with those two investigators. And basically she said that she talks about their body language, the way that they made facial expressions at her. She was describing these facial expressions. She was describing how they made eye contact, and she was reading between the lines. It sounds like somebody put the idea into her head that they had this solved. Basically, in that interview, she said that one of these people basically inferred to her without a doubt they were going to solve it, and they had their guy. So like you're saying, CJ, she has to put, what choice does she have? She has to relinquish all trust into these investigators. And then they make her think that they have the evidence for whatever reason to convict BK. And that's all it feels like that's where the turning point was. And could it be that somebody made her feel that there's evidence that that isn't there? I don't know. But I do know that her attitude was, she said she was convinced from those. Steve even went to say that was a big day for you. That was a huge day. She said that was her favorite day in an interview. So I think if we look at why Christy believes that, it can be really traced back to the interaction on the 13th when they gave Bryan Kohberger's name, when from all information that we have, they didn't have Bryan Kohberger's name. But I don't know. I just wanted to add that, because when you talk about Christy, I go back to that one interview that Steve says was her favorite, and she says was a big day for her. And she describes both officers and what they said when she said, "Will you solve this?" And those interactions were incredibly important to her. So I think it ties back to that. And somebody, I don't know.
It does. It does, because also at that same time, and thanks for bringing that up, because also at the same time, Steve G also said, look, guys, they told us they got so much that just wait for trial, right? And we're looking at trial now, and what are we seeing? Public opinion that was being pushed back then. Why did they need public opinion to be pushed back in? Think about back at the beginning. Remember when Banfield and all these shows were coming out with sources inside the investigation or telling us about the Bryan Kohberger getting kicked out of bars and all this other stuff, right? Yeah. Public opinion. That's what they rely on up there. If you dig into all of the previous cases up in Idaho, you will see a lot of public opinion getting pushed, a lot of humongous charges getting brought on people, so they will take plea deals. One of the reasons why, because we're sitting here looking at this stuff going, how does somebody try and go after a DP based off of what we're seeing already in court? It doesn't make sense, right? They wanted Bryan to take a plea deal. What does a public defender most of the time do in a case like this? Shout out to Ann Taylor. What does a public offender do? Public defender, most of the time, they're looking for the plea deal.
Mm-hmm.
They're looking for that plea deal. They were expecting him to have public, once he got public defender, all right, let's throw the DP. He'll take a plea. We don't have to show that we don't really have anything. And that's what I think is taking place. And when it comes to what Christy and Steve are saying, and that's why I think they're the ones that are saying it, is because they're the ones that are sucked into the public opinion narrative that has been pushed out there. Because if they didn't have this public opinion before the next semester started, we already heard when they did start the next semester after they arrested Kohberger, we already heard that only 50% of the students showed back up. Can anybody out here in the community tell me that if you had a child that was going to the University of Idaho and that crime took place, would you allow your child to go back to that university? You're out your mind.
Mm-mm.
And that's why they needed the public opinion, because they needed to make sure that they survived. Because Steve G even told you in the very beginning, look, guys, Moscow will disappear, and I don't want that to happen. He knew if this stuff wasn't going to be, we need to get somebody arrested, we need to da-da-da-da-da-da-da, who's coming back to that university? That's why they had to create online classes that they never created before, to make sure that the students that were staying home at mom's house in Tennessee were still enrolled. That's why the university started just a couple months after after BK was arrested. They started to purchase, or tried to purchase, the University of Phoenix online. And they tried to screw out the local community there, because they were the ones that were putting up the money, and thank God it didn't go through. That's what they were trying to do, make sure that they had the attendance. They were basically going to buy a scam of the company, a scam of a university, where our own military came out a couple years ago and said, we are not working with the University of Phoenix Online, because it's a scam. And when our own military won't work with a university, and the University of Idaho's trying to purchase it because nobody else wants to purchase it because the military won't even use it anymore, University of Idaho said, I don't care. We need the attendance. The public opinion has been so blown out of proportion, and that's where a lot of the misinformation comes, because you mix it in with the fact that there hasn't been very much put out. There wasn't very much put out. A lot of stuff did get leaked out. And when it comes to the stuff not being put out, well, then you can control it even more. Unfortunately, now it's time for them to show their poker hand, and we're just seeing a pair of sevens as far as I'm concerned. Because if you're charging somebody with a DP, you would have way more. And AR, you brought up OJ's case, and there's so many similarities with this case. Because you got to think, look at how OJ was able to get off, and look at how much, if you really studied the case, look at how much evidence was there for OJ to be convicted. They had so much. And so we're looking at BK's case, and we're sitting here going, where's all this other stuff that's supposed to be there? You're not seeing it. You're going, wait a minute, all it is just some stuff on a sheath. When you're talking about how long it lasts on brass, that's another question as well. But when it comes to just that, there's no other evidence that ties them. There's nothing else there. So then you have to sit there and go, wait a minute, there's other explanations for the knife sheath. I've brought it up that I think that it was Kaylee or Maddie's. It was Maddie's. Somebody bought it for Maddie from a pawn shop, maybe something. It was there for protection. You saw the machetes and all the other weapons that were around in that neighborhood. Hell, you saw the students that were unalived with photos chopping pumpkins in half and videos and stuff like that too. Big weapons around there. The houses all around that neighborhood. Do I see Maddie having a pew pew for protection? I don't think so. But when you're talking about the K-bar, hunting up there is completely normal. When I talked to the students up there, I talked to the Washington and the University of Idaho students when I went out there for the year anniversary. They all told me that this animal stuff is normal. It's been taking place for a long time. It didn't just start taking place before the crime started taking place. This stuff is normal stuff. They have groups that go out there hunting that aren't hunting for sport. They're hunting for the brutality of it. And so why wouldn't somebody have a small little knife to protect themselves in case something happened? And when you look at how the knife sheath is placed, how it's halfway under Maddie and then Kaylee's legs are on top of Maddie, to me that says that that Kaylee heard something. She knew that there was the knife on the little shelf or under the bed, went and grabbed it, had the sheath in her left hand, had the knife in her right hand, didn't know if she was going to have to put the knife back in the sheath because she didn't know if it was a joke or not. When somebody busts through the door to commit the crime, she realizes it's not somebody that's playing a joke. She's automatically going to drop the sheath with her left hand and use her left hand to try and defend herself while she's using the right hand with the weapon. That's how I see the knife sheath snuggling up halfway under Maddie while Kaylee's on top. And so when you can create even another scenario of that knife sheath right there, well, then you got to go back and think, well, then why wasn't there any liquid in the vehicle? Why wasn't there any traces in the apartment? Why wasn't there any traces anywhere else? And to expect somebody to have some kind of clean machine to clean up every amount of the evidence of themselves besides the sheath inside the crime scene, not only that, but clean up all the other DNA evidence that could link you in your vehicle too. I don't know how you can clean a vehicle that good. I was detailing vehicles for sports teams up in Akron when I lived there, and I was damn good at my job. But I'm gonna be honest right now. There's no way I could tell you that I could get DNA out of a car. You're talking inside vents and all of these carpet fibers, minute particles, and there's not even any of that there.
I think we've seen it proven through the years of criminal activity and the people that get caught with the smallest of drop of anything within a vehicle. I mean, I've seen people get nailed with, you just can't even imagine where it gets or how little it is when it's found, and it nails them. And I agree with you. It just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, I think that's what's going to be so interesting is when we do get to trial, because we are going to trial. It's going to be interesting to see how the prosecution presents everything and their motive and their thought process and the play out of it all. And then it's going to be very interesting to see if the defense even needs to defend that, because maybe it doesn't make sense to begin with. We'll see. We'll definitely see. But Swamp, I know you were looking to interject there. Do you have something you want to add? I'm not even sure her seat. There she is. She's on mute.
Yeah, sorry. No, it's just really interesting conversation. It's really interesting to hear CJ talking about this too, because we talk within our own sphere, and it's nice to hear his opinion because you kind of come from outside of, we don't talk too much on panel. So it's really interesting to hear your take on things. And yeah, so I do appreciate listening to you. We were talking about the also the concept where the knife could have been Maddie's. And I've heard that so many times before. I like the way that you described that. It makes a lot of sense, whereas the weapon could have been Maddie's. But I guess what my question is, have we heard that? Was there a rumor stated early on about the knife being Maddie's, or is that something we just speculated because of the location of the knife?
I never heard it before. That's something that I thought of within the first few months when it came to learning about the knife sheath. And because other than that, like when I went out there for my year anniversary or for their year anniversary, I also went to the phone company that had towers. And I wanted to ask them because I went out boots on the ground previously in another location, and I was caught where I didn't have any service whatsoever, and I was in an area that was dangerous, and the people knew the stuff that I was discussing there. And so it was a very hairy situation that I was in. And so when I went out to Idaho, that was one of the things I first went to a phone company, and I was like, okay, I need to know what spots I won't have service, so that way if I'm in a situation where I need to get back to service as soon as possible, I know exactly what roads, and I'm always extra prepared for any situation that takes place. And so when I was looking at the towers and trying to see, okay, this is where I won't have coverage down here, down south, basically south out of Moscow, is when I even stepping out of my car, the guy said, yeah, even stepping out of your car down here, you're not going to have a bar. But when I noticed it, I was like, wait a minute. I said, this tower right here serves 1122, and this same tower also serves in Pullman, Washington, right? Yeah, that's right. So I said, so I'm looking at this map, and so if I'm right here in Pullman, I can literally connect to that tower that then connects to 1122. Yeah, that's right. Holy crap. So when I'm thinking that, I'm like, well, okay, the cell phone pings at the house, well, that can be explained. All this other stuff that we're hearing, we started to find out there was nothing to it. That's why we all ventured away from mainstream media, because of their BS, a lot of it with the BK case. And then I start to think about the sheath and where it was placed, and I'm sitting there going, wait a minute. If this is all they have, well then, if I'm looking at where it was placed and I'm picturing the scene in my head, because when I picture everything, I have to picture it as the person doing the crime, and I have to picture it as the person having the crime happen to them. And so when I'm looking at it and I'm going, wait a minute, why would somebody, if I was going in to brutally commit that crime, I'm not going to have a sheath in my hand. I'm going to need my hand for defense. The only time I would have the sheath in my hand is if I needed to make sure I could put it back. If I had to put it back, that's the only time. Otherwise, it's in the car, it's in my pocket, it's on my belt, it's somewhere where it's not going to come off. And they're not going to give a sheath to our military where during a struggle, it's going to come off your belt loop. They're not doing that either. So then I'm sitting there and I'm going, well, if I committed this crime, I'm not having a sheath on me, because why would I need to put it back in the sheath until I'd be waiting until I got in the car to put it back in the sheath, because I don't want to leave anything behind. So if I'm going in there, then I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. So what makes sense for the sheath to be there? That's when I started discussing the whole, well, I bet it was Maddie's, and I think Kaylee was the one that was using it and holding the sheath until she didn't need to hold the sheath because she was too worried about trying to defend herself. Boom, it drops down right to the left. I was getting bashed a lot, and still do to this day, for that theory when it comes to it being that. But when you're looking at the evidence and you're seeing what's not there, it continues to make sense more and more and more, because you expect that other evidence to be there. You expect other evidence of BK to be in that house. You expect it, and when you find out that it's not there, it's all about if you're trying to really explore it as an investigator, you have to explore it with all theories, thoughts, and opinions until you can exclude it. I don't see it being excluded that it could possibly be their knife sheath.
I absolutely agree with you. I absolutely agree with you.
Same
Do you
here.
guys ever get bashed for that? Since you guys bring it up, do you ever get bashed for that?
We get
Yeah.
bashed for everything, CJ.
Yeah.
We get bashed for everything. I got bashed the other day because I wore white socks. You know, I mean, come on. You know, opinions are just that. It's our opinions. And when we try to speak upon those opinions and then give a basis why we feel that way, and we expand a little bit, people can tend to start to gravitate like we're explaining as if that's the absolute truth, that's exactly how it happened. It's like, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm giving you is my personal perspective with an opinion base to back that. Whether you agree with that or not is up to you. To me, it makes sense. So, like when I listen to you, CJ, or Swamp or Robert speak upon something, I listen to it and then I digest it and I say, well, that either makes sense or it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to attack you based upon the fact I know it's your thoughts, it's your opinion. It's exactly kind of, and that's why I tend to, when I look at other people speaking, I try to give them the respect. But then when it gets out of hand, like when you get a personal attack over something that's just, it's just not warranted. It's not even necessary. Now we've gotten to a point that, are you telling me that my opinion, my thought process doesn't matter? That now I'm just illegitimate when it comes to a conversation? Because I wouldn't speak upon things, CJ, that I didn't have a little bit of knowledge or a little bit of experience in. I would divert that conversation to someone like yourself or to Robert or to Swamp or to somebody else that actually has the backing to speak upon it. Then I would add my opinion based upon your information that you gave me. Now I can give like a opinion based upon that, but it's not going to be an attacking one. It's going to be one whether I agree or I don't agree. So it's like I'm looking at my chat right now, and typically, CJ, we have one of the most amazing chats. And tonight, someone that I just literally gave credit to and respect to has created a disorder in our chat based upon something that you said that they didn't agree with. And to me, that's unnecessary, and I don't allow that. Just so people know, in my community, if I just remove people, I get rid of you. Because it's not worth
and none of us really, it's like I said before, none of us know because we weren't there, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, I'm not saying he's innocent. All I'm
Right.
saying is you got to look at the evidence, because I'm not worried about Bryan Kohberger being innocent or not. I'm worried about these victims and families getting the truth and justice.
Right.
Period.
I just want, I want facts and truth. I've lived enough. I mean, for all three of you on panel and everybody in chat, I'll just kind of end my little segment this way. I lived my life for long enough in a dishonest way, and I grew tired of it, and I grew sick of the fact I had no family, I had no friends, I had nobody that stood with me because I had put myself in a position I didn't deserve those things. So I had to come within myself and look at my wife and say, what am I legitimately doing? And she says, well, you're still dishonest. And this was years ago. And I looked at her, I said, well, I can't do that anymore. I still remember this day too, because it teared me up. Because even my wife said, you know, if you continue down this path, I have to leave. And here I am sitting, you know, with 3 dogs. And I'm like, wait, what? You're going to leave. But it put me into that perspective. Like, honesty really does matter. Integrity and respect really does matter. And it's all aspects of life. So when you say what's truly important here is the victims' families, justice, it's a totality of the entire community that matters. And it's all based upon respect, integrity, and honesty. And if we can get people looking into that very direction, one, it can change people's lives. I'm proof of that. Literally, if it thumps somebody in the head hard enough, it can change their life. And by me changing my life, now I can stand here and give guidance to others that potentially could change their lives, their families' lives. And this honesty wave and respect and integrity can spread and it becomes more of a natural thing across the board. But right now, if we really look at not only Idaho, but we look at just everywhere around the country right now, the respect factor, the integrity factor is out the window. And that's why people are resorting to such measures as bringing other people down, violent acts. We're seeing shootings every day. We're seeing all this happen, and there's an exact reason why. And I joined your fight, just like Swamp does, Robert does. We joined your fight for the right way of not only presenting ourselves, but also our discussions in regards to the case. And that's why this team has come together and worked so well together. So we all have the general path to work in the same way. Even if our opinions are different, we respect, we love, we care, and we seek exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, because it's about community, not competition. And when people bring negativity, it is a competition thing. It's a I'm right, you're wrong kind of thing. And that's not what it's about. We need people working together because that's how you can have the biggest voice and that's how you can make the biggest difference. And who wants to show up to a party where there's nobody else? You know, it takes a community, and it'll always take a community. And it'll take the community that's rowing in that same path, because it's not only about truth and justice, but it's about peace and positivity too.
Well, damn it, now I'm lost, CJ, because I like to party by myself. I mean, damn it, man! I want the entire drink to be mine. Like
I'm by myself too much, man. I'm always working and I'm always by myself, so we're on different ends of the spectrum there.
Hey, I can't do that unless it's my birthday. And my birthday's not till June. I'll be 53 years old in June. And this weekend I'm gonna have a house full of screaming 9-year-olds because my daughter's turning 10 this Sunday, and her birthday party Saturday. So it's
awesome.
gonna be a Powerpuff Girl birthday theme.
That's awesome. Those are the best memories, man. Those are the best memories.
It's a big one. She's hitting double digits. So
yeah,
she is.
It's got to be the Powerpuff. Right.
So
and we're gonna have a big. I'm renting a big bouncy house, and it's gonna be out in the front yard. And I told my wife, I'm like, while I'm cooking the hamburgers, hot dogs, and brats in the backyard, I'm like, they can all be out in the front yard in the bouncy house.
Oh yeah, that'll be the attraction, man. That's awesome. The bouncy house too. Happy birthday to your daughter, man.
Most definitely. And I don't mean to guys to kind of cut short. I was talking about doing an hour and 30, hour and 45-minute live, but then we see CJ jumping up and it just gets extended. And, I definitely, before I part ways, I definitely, CJ, want to get directly in touch with you and speak about doing some work together, not only on the Idaho4, but widespread. You've got some great causes that you stand for, and like I said, I truly support you as not only like another content creator, but an actual fan and a follower. So, before I, get to saying too much, I've followed you for a long time. I remember when you were smaller scale, and I'm so proud to see what you've accomplished. And it's the same with Robert and Swamp Rose as well. It's just a blessing to have you guys come up. But I do want to wind it down, if you don't mind, CJ. If you have anybody you want to shout out to before we head out, I know you have some of your fan in here, and that's great. But I'll definitely
just shout out to you all. Just shout out to you all. Because it's more than just talking true crime. It's about promoting an energy as well, and that's the most important thing. Is the energy that gets promoted, because there's not enough the energy that exists on this planet, unfortunately. But when we can all come together, like I said, community makes waves in so many different ways. And so anytime you all want to hang out, we can do it. However, I really enjoyed it, and thank you for letting me up here last minute just to hang out and talk with you guys. I really appreciate it.
It was awesome.
Yeah, it was an honor, CJ. Yeah, I will be putting a couple of videos out either later tonight or possibly tomorrow. One of them, I'm going to talk about the Vivian Woods, Missy Woods, and her charges, and exactly how they found that she was basically screwing over half of these defendants. And I'm also going to put out one. I don't know if you followed Delphi, CJ.
Yeah, I did.
A new affidavit just dropped yesterday, and yeah, basically this gentleman, his name is James Winters. He had this affidavit wrote because his nephew Richie Davis had been writing multiple letters to the prosecution and the investigators, and the investigators and prosecutors were basically ignoring his letters that he was writing them. And there was a gentleman named Ron Logan who had confessed to the Delphi killings, but the prosecution and the investigators suppressed his confession and went ahead and moved on with this thing with Richard Allen. And so if there is a potential retrial somewhere down the line, James Winters said he would testify on the stand, as well as Richie Davis, on exactly what had happened, what the letters pertained, and why. And he wants to know why the prosecution and the investigators suppressed the confession of Ron Logan.
I'm in Indiana. I've been up there plenty of times. I know people that live there locally, and I'll tell you, it's corruption, bro. And when I first started my show a few years ago, I talked about Delphi in the beginning because it was a case that I studied. And from the very beginning, when you look at the two bridge guys, to me, it was Klein and Logan connection.
Yeah.
And I've always felt that way. So yeah, any of these cases, for sure. I think it'll be cool to even bring more attention to these other cases as well by getting together. For sure.
Swamp, why don't you hop in, Swamp? I've been talking over you so much.
I'm just, it's first off, I want to say it's really nice to see my audience. I haven't been live in a long time, and it's just good. So good to see the chat, and it's so good to be live and see this audience, see AR's audience, and see Robert's audience. So I want to start by saying thank you since we're winding this down. I want to thank the chat and thank my mods and thank my panel. I had a really good time. Like I said before, CJ, it's great to see you again. And it was really nice to hear like your perspective because it's outside of what we normally talk about. And you brought up some subjects I hadn't thought about in a while. And it was nice being on panel with you too. It's always nice seeing you. I don't really have much to report on for this week other than I'd love for you to, I really appreciate you guys watching and listening to what I had to say. And I'd love for you to consider subscribing to my channel if you haven't already, and hit the notification bell because I'd like to do another live stream this week, I think. And if you'd like to be part of it, please hit that bell because I don't know when. I don't know.
Well,
I'm a little scared, sorry.
CJ, I'm going to say my thank yous as well to you joining us, and I'll be in the back area emailing you here very soon. I'll even share my personal info, my cell with you. We could get in touch and let's get together again, and let's share the wealth over onto your channel, and we can do it here as well, and we could just bring light to how content creators can work together and make a big difference. So I've got your back. I support you, brother, and I'm going to say
appreciate you.
And Robert and Swamp, if you can hang out for 1 second before we part ways, I just want to say something with you guys. But again, CJ, major pleasure, man. It's a blessing and big fan of yours.
Appreciate you guys, and thank you so much, and have a peaceful and positive night too before you go to bed.
Bye, CJ. Good to see you again.
We're going to do our very best. Thank you, CJ. All right. So everybody, we're going to go and wind down the live. I'm so appreciative, Kiki, Robert. I mean, it's always amazing to work alongside both of you, but as well, we have another amazing creator join us in CJ.
Yes.
And I know sometimes it can stir up the crowd with the difference of opinions, but I want to thank those that are here with us now in our community, still live with us. Thank you so much for being with us. You guys are amazing. I'm sorry if we had any hassles. I'll learn how to get some moderators on my channel. And I do thank all the mods of the other channel. I'm going to let these two say their goodbyes. Before we part ways in the back, though, Robert and Swamp, just a quick moment with you guys, but take it away, you two.
Yeah, I want to say thank you to everyone that was that was only in the AR's chat, but in Swamp's chat, but my chat as well. Meanie, the Maven who just popped in at the last minute. Heather Fitzgerald, Mark and Betty, Leslie and Billy, love Tina. I want to say thank you for tuning in tonight, and I love you all.
And I want to thank my subscribers, my viewers, my chat, and my mods. I said thank you before. I just want to make sure I'm taking another moment to thank you. But I also want to thank my Discord server. And I want to thank the people who helped me research, because preparing for tonight was such a vast amount of documents. It was nice for everybody really help bounce facts off you guys and really get down to some of this language that can be confusing, and sort through some of the speculations and find out the truth. So aside from all the viewers, the people who put hard work into this channel, it is 100% a community. So thank you to my researchers and my Discord as well. So thank you.
And just real quick before I part ways, just to let everybody know, there is a pretty good schedule this week, moving into next week, of lives that are being planned and being worked through. I do have a Thursday event planned with Post Woke that I'm excited about. Many of you guys have seen us do work before. So she on Thursday is a part of the plan. Murder Metal Mayhem with Pete. If I can get him to make the strive to come on live, we would definitely entertain that this week as well. Unfiltered Lucky is scheduled for next Monday, and that should be an amazing show as well. So if anybody loves Unfiltered Lucky and respects him as much as I do, definitely check into that as well. And there's always more on the horizon, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes.
This team of creators, Kiki, Robert, and I, are driven to bring the best that we can, both via content, but also lives. And we're just going to stay driven. And hopefully we're doing this. We've all discussed it, and we'll announce it soon on how often, how much we want to deal with all of you. No, I'm kidding. How much you guys would want to deal with us. And I did see my wife just posted a link, so she must be getting off work and heading home. So I'm going to say my goodbyes. I appreciate all of yous, and I will see everybody again soon.
Bye, everyone.
Bye
Peace.
now. Hopefully I'm doing this right.